What are the top digital transformation interviews for 2024? That's what we're going to cover here today in episode 200 of Transformation Ground Control.
Welcome to Transformation Ground Control. Ground Control. The podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation. This podcast features technology agnostic and international discussions related to digital strategy, software selection, implementation, change management, business process optimization, and everything else you need to know to make your digital transformation project successful. Whether you're embarking on an ERP implementation, supply chain transformation, or any other business or digital transformation, this podcast is for you. Now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello, welcome to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 200. This is the podcast that has everything to do with digital transformation. It's tech agnostic, independent, free from vendor bias, and we're here to talk about everything related to people, process, technology, and strategy aspects of transformation. So thanks for being here today. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting, and Third Stage is the sponsor of this show. The show is produced by Major Tom Productions, and my co-host, as always, is Darian Chwialkowski. Darian, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. An exciting episode.
It is. Yeah, it's kind of an interesting coincidence that not only are we at a big milestone with episode 200, but we're at episode 200 here toward the end of the year, 2024, and it's a good time. It just seemed like a perfect episode for us to look back at the top 10 interviews of the year. So we're going to play you sort of the best of compilation, the best of this podcast. If you haven't seen a lot of these episodes, we'll play you clips of the top performing interviews on the podcast, the ones that were of most interest and the ones that you may want to go back and watch. So with each of these episodes or each of these interview segments, we'll let you know which episode you can go back to see the full interview if you're particularly intrigued by any of these people. So so tell us a little bit about, Darian, just can you tell us a little bit about how we came up with this top 10 list?
Yeah, so we took what our audience seemed to like the best and engage with the most. As far as live interviews that Eric does every Tuesday with different guests, and whatever ones had the highest ranking throughout the year as far as engagement, views, likes, comments, that is how we created this list. So we're going to do a little countdown to our top one of the year.
Yeah, and that's an interesting way to do it because it's like when we film these live interviews, what happens is we edit it, we polish it up, we add more content to it, and then we sort of re-release a full podcast episode that includes that live interview. But we look at the live interview metrics, and that gives us a really good indicator of where the most interest was, just because it's isolated to that one discussion in those videos. So that's super interesting. And so these are the top 10 videos of the year, the top 10 interviews, I should say, of the year. And the first one coming in at number 10 is an interview that I did with Casey Jenkins. And this was back from episode number 178 of this podcast. And by the way, if you want to go watch any of these episodes, we'll tell you the episode number and you can just go to transformationgroundcontrol.com. If you don't already subscribe on an audio podcast platform or on YouTube or LinkedIn or whatever, just go to transformationgroundcontrol.com and you can find all the past 200 episodes there. We'll tell you what episode to go to see the full interview. So if you like someone in particular, you can go back and watch it there. Transformationgroundcontrol.com. So number 10 is Casey Jenkins. This is from episode 178. And we talked about using business process and technology to improve supply chains. Tell us a bit about how did you end up in supply chain and process improvement? Like, how did you plan on doing this all along? Was it sort of some grand master plan you had as a kid, or did you stumble into it? How did you end up here?
That is a great story, to be honest. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a meteorologist. So I wanted to be the next, Jim Cantori. Like, that was my dream. I loved weather. I loved, storm chasing. I am a storm spotter with NOAA. It's now a hobby. But I used to love watching the radar, forecasting, all of it. And I do actually have 2 degrees in weather. But I got out of undergrad and got into the workforce and got into transportation. And I started to go, well, wait a second, this is kind of cool. I had never up until that point paid attention to, looked at how are products actually moving. And I really enjoyed the transportation side of things and got finished with my weather degree and I was like, well, what's next? Like, do I just completely forego this experience that I have within, transportation supply chain, or and go the route of weather? Or do I maybe get some more education in this field that I already have some experience in? And I chose supply chain. So I like to say that I got into it by accident and I stayed into it by choice. And I feel like that's a lot of people, that's how they've gotten into the industry. You're either chose to do it because family or someone is in it, or you accidentally got into it and you stayed in it. But I really enjoy the challenge. And I think that's one thing that's fun about the industry, is that it's always changing and it's always challenging. But then I realized very quickly, because everyone always asks me, well, how are weather and supply chain related at all? They're both processes, right? When you really stop to think about it, they are both processes. So like within weather, you have something that'll happen in the atmosphere that triggers an output, right? Same thing within supply chain, same thing within business. One small change in a weather process can produce a different output. Well, you've got the same thing in supply chain and business as well. So I just quickly realized that both are processes. I just like how things work. I just like an order to things. I like being able to find out how to get to an output easier, faster, more efficiently. And so that's how I got into it and stayed into it. And I would say it suits me. It suits me pretty well.
I couldn't help but think about, as you're talking about transportation and weather and meteorology, and you were talking earlier about the tech companies you've worked with, and thinking about AI, and it made me start to think, I wonder if there's a way to marry, weather patterns and predictions with transportation, logistics, supply chain, and how it affects it, and how you should route things differently potentially. I mean, might be a way for you to work back into meteorology and use some of that data to help in an AI sort of a way potentially.
Yeah, well, there are some companies out there who actually do that, because it's a part of like a risk management strategy, right? I mean, we all know that certain areas of the country end up facing, adverse weather. Let's look at the Southeast during hurricane season, or the Midwest during, storm season, the snow in the Rockies and, the, I guess, more Pacific Northwest. But, it's one of those things where companies do have to shift around because of the weather. So there is actually a little more direct of a tie than just the process side of it, in that, weather does impact, risks and potential risks, whether that's just having to reroute, flooding, or risk to the business itself or the assets themselves, things like that. So yeah, there are some companies out there who do that, though. It is a part of risk management for sure.
Yeah. So you were talking about your education. It's a little intimidating because you're very well educated. I thought I was pretty well educated, but I do not have this academic pedigree that you have. But you've got dual master's degrees in supply chain management, project management, and then a black belt in Lean Six Sigma. I only have one master's degree and I'm a green belt in Six Sigma. So you've totally outdone me and maybe a lot of the people listening here today. But tell us how you ended up doing. How'd you pursue this academic side of things?
Yes. Well, another thing I'll add is I did just start my doctorate in business administration as well, focusing on supply chain logistics. So one thing is I truly just love learning. That's a big thing for me, is I love understanding from a theoretical and conceptual standpoint how things work. But when I started to go into supply chain, I felt like I needed that framework. I needed that understanding. I needed that baseline conceptual, I guess, perspective of how this all works. That's just how I learn. That's just how I am. I need to know the why behind things to make sure that I know how to effectively execute those things. And when I finished up my supply chain master's, it was actually right as COVID was happening. And I started to see how companies were going to be executing a lot of projects within supply chain specifically on how to optimize, how to combat some of the challenges that COVID actually brought, or highlighted some areas of improvement that we all needed as organizations. And so I said, well, hey, I should go get some education and framework around how project management works and then marry the two together. And I quickly learned, though, that project management and supply chain management are very, very interconnected disciplines. And the mindsets needed for both are very, very similar. Some of the tools that are used can be used cross-disciplinary. Some of the frameworks can be used on both sides, but it's also important as a project manager executing some of these initiatives within supply chain, understanding how that project is feeding into the operational side of the business. I think from a strictly project management perspective, and I can say this knowing both disciplines, it's, you're just executing the tasks to get to the output, but understanding how that output feeds into the overall operations of the business, or how different tasks or delays in a project can impact the overall operations of a business. I think that's important from the project management perspective. The lean side of things, I've heard a lot of talks around if lean is actually still a valuable methodology. And especially because most people said, well, JIT failed, right, within COVID. It doesn't give leniency to be able to adapt or adjust. But for me, I see it from more of the value and waste components, and how, the customer-centric perspective that lean takes. And so I wanted to make sure I had that framework as just a tool in the tool belt, to make sure that I'm approaching things, even if it's not from a wholly lean perspective, but at least applying a few things here and there in relation to value and waste. So that's how those three things are interconnected, at least from my perspective, and I found it valuable, but you'll learn quick that a lot of these methodologies and tools, they're all seeking to do the same thing. So
yeah, exactly. You just have to pick which ones apply at what time. Yeah. So in these 10 years plus you've been in the supply chain industry, what are some of the biggest trends or changes you've seen over the last decade?
Oh my gosh. I would say the first one being the business landscape. And it's funny because I don't really feel like that was changing as quickly prior to the pandemic. And I feel like the pandemic really just shifted that landscape overnight. And I say that because I know, like, in my programs, even before and in my work before the pandemic hit, the way things were working was just so different. And case studies that I was doing, or, research that I was doing prior to that point, was looking at some of the ways we're doing things now. Right. And it was saying, oh, this is 10, 15 years off. We're not expecting the industry to evolve this quickly. So, I think the idea was there that the landscape would eventually get to where we're at now. But I think the pandemic really accelerated it. And I would say that comes from, the landscape itself being, I guess, the customer demands. How fast can we get products into customers' hands? What their expectations are in terms of quality, sourcing, sustainability. What's their experience going to be like? And I feel like that's all really shifted. Before, with brick and mortar, you walked into the store. Now, how fast can I get my stuff delivered online? How fast can this be at my doorstep? And I say that as a serial Amazon purchaser. So that would be the first thing. The second thing I would say is the technology. Obviously, I don't think we could, go through a conversation without mentioning how, technology has just drastically advanced in the last 5 to 7 years. And just how readily accessible data and information are because of that. I think that's a benefit to the industry for sure. I also can see how it could be a hindrance as well. So,
right. Yeah. Interesting. So a lot of changes in it's interesting thinking about how COVID sort of accelerated some things that are already sort of percolating under the surface or starting. And then COVID sort of fast forwarded a lot of that.
Yes.
And then of course, now with AI and technology, just doing this hockey stick, rapid pace of change, it's, I imagine it's affecting supply chains even more than in the past.
Yes. Yeah, it's, and to be honest, like I said, when I remember a case study that I had done and research within my program, and it was talking about leveraging AI and more visibility and technology. And it was like, yeah, we don't expect this for another 10 to 15 years. And it's like, it's only been 6 years. Now we're already way further advanced, I feel like, than what was predicted, 5-6 years ago. So it really is interesting to see how things have shifted. But it's important, I think, for companies to understand that, you can't go from 0 to 100 overnight either. There has to be some sort of incremental steps taken. I think COVID did highlight the fact that our infrastructure, our technologies, the way that we've been doing things really did need a revamp. How a lot of companies didn't look at risk management. Now that's like a staple. How being adaptive to disruption, and how many disruptions are there nowadays, and how it's all interconnected. I don't really think that was highlighted until the pandemic, at least on a scale of business-wide, global-wide, that perspective. So,
yeah, it was interesting to see how, the global supply chains as we knew it up until 2020 had been pretty stable, and it had taken decades to build that global supply chain, especially like in the US, so much of our supply chain got offshored and manufacturing got offshored, and it just became more of a complex global supply chain. And then when COVID hit, it sort of exposed the vulnerabilities and the risks.
Right.
And so I don't know if, back to your point, I don't know if just in time and lean was the problem, or if it was the fact that we relied too much on, sole sourcing certain products to vendors that were in areas that were affected by, geopolitics or COVID or whatever. I don't know the answer to that, but it seems like it sort of exposed some of the vulnerabilities that were always there. It just, that supply chain was built for very stable times, it seems like.
Right.
Yeah.
And, I would also say too, that I don't feel like disruptions, I don't want to say they weren't as prevalent, because I think they were. I just don't think we had the access to the information, the data, until COVID kind of highlighted that for us, of how many disruptions there are. I also don't think we really fully grasped how interconnected all of, the operations of supply chain are. It's not just one supply chain. It's both internal, external, on a macro scale. I really think the pandemic kind of highlighted the importance of understanding that interconnectivity among, every process within your organization, with your suppliers, with the suppliers of the suppliers, with your providers, with all of it. And just how lasting the impacts can be too.
Yeah.
Because it is a trickle down effect. I see it as kind of a systemic thing, right? Where you've got one risk that happens. Well, it's not isolated in most cases, especially on a scale of like the pandemic. It's not isolated to one area of, supply chain or one company. It trickles down into everything else. And when you think about it in that more, I guess, systems type thinking, then you really start to understand, that's why we're now more cognizant of the disruptions that are happening, and being able to see those a little more, because we felt the impacts, as trickle down or as the direct receiver of the disruption. So it's been an interesting shift, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. Now, a lot of what you're alluding to here is complexity and risk.
Yes.
When you think back to all the different supply chains you work with and have worked with in the past, do you have one in particular that's the most complex, or maybe one example of a really complex supply chain? Maybe, you don't necessarily need to mention names or confidential information, but how do you give us a kind of a case study or a use case of one of the more complex ones you've seen?
Yeah. So I actually, I worked, and I feel like I'll preface this with, I feel like a lot of startup environments tend to be kind of like this, to be honest. So it's not uncommon to see this. But I worked with a company where they were manufacturing in China, and they were obviously pulling those products into the US, distributing them into retail locations within the US. But the products were, I guess, make to order, so customized. And so a lot of times they would face last minute changes. They would face last minute, we need to alter the size. We need to alter this. We need to alter the color. We don't like that. And so being able to shift and pivot to those things alone within manufacturing was very complex. Because the other thing too is that putting the products into retail did not care if you did not hit a deadline. You had to hit that deadline. You're going into a retail outlet. There's no wiggle room on when they need the stuff at their location. And so you are still expected, despite the changes, to still get your product at that date. So it's a lot of pivoting, a lot of quick transitioning, and then adjusting all of your plans accordingly to fit that. And so I would say that was probably the most complex one that I have seen. But it did produce a lot of opportunity. And I think for a lot of startups within that side of things, it does produce a lot of opportunity to identify, hey, can we do things like mass customization? Can we get a baseline of things and then, customize at the last minute? Are we able to utilize, domestic distribution or domestic being able to customize these products and then send them in? So that way you're cutting time out of your timeline to be able to facilitate changes at the last minute. So it brought about an idea of how can we add buffer into different things? How do we add buffer into our manufacturing? How do we add buffer into our transportation? Because that's the other thing too. Getting container space, getting, air space, if you have to air freight, those are all different things, especially with fluctuating rates. Maybe you didn't plan for when you scoped, the project or scoped producing these products. So I would say that was probably the most complex one that I've had to deal with.
It sounds super complex. I mean, the make to order aspect of it, the make to order manufacturing combined with the global offshoring and that sort of thing. I can see how that could become very complex very quickly.
Yes. Yeah. And putting out a lot of fires too, because, if you face a disruption at any point within that process and you've got a hard deadline, it's like you have to immediately jump in to fix it. And so, and like I said, I feel like that's pretty common within more startup realms, but it's looking at what are you currently doing? How can you at least mitigate a little bit of that disruption and plan ahead for some of those more things that are known to be happening? Like, for example, with one client, I always knew they were going to pop up at the last minute with a change. Okay. I then started to know I need to build a buffer here, or I need to come up with a different way of doing this more consistently, or I need to make sure that they're aware that if this change happens, we're going to have to add timeline, or we're going to have to add cost, or whatever the case may be. So you start to kind of learn some of those things that you can start to add into these executions, especially in the startup realm. But yeah, that was chaos all the time.
Yeah. So that was Casey Jenkins talking about how we can use business process and technology to improve supply chains. That is from episode 178. So if you want to watch that full interview with Casey, you can go to transformationgroundcontrol.com. Just scroll through all the episodes until you see 178 and you'll find the episode there with her in it. And you can watch the full hour-long plus discussion that we had with her. So that brings us to number 9, Darian. What have we got here at number 9?
Yeah, this interview was with Walker Reynolds. It was a great interview. And the topic was, what is the future of manufacturing and tech in Industry 4.0? This was on episode 172. So if you want to check out the full interview, head to that episode. But let's roll the clip.
Kind of along these lines, this is from Darian, our podcast co-host here. Darian on LinkedIn says, what are some of the high skill positions you mentioned earlier that people should focus on if they want to work in Industry 4 or in Industry 5, as you're describing here?
All right. So that great question. I'm gonna rather than positions, I'll say this. All human beings will become citizen developers. So all of us who work in industry will become citizen developers. So that is through no code and low code applications. We are going to use technology to build useful technology for either me or other people. Similar to the way that everybody knows how everyone dabbles in Excel, right? It doesn't matter where you work. Everyone dabbles in Excel. Right. Everyone dabbles with OneNote. Imagine that on steroids. That's what citizen development is, right? Everyone is going to be a citizen data analyst. Okay. So what's important is that people focus on digital fluency. So rather than the role itself, focus on digital fluency. So everyone needs to have a basic understanding of how code works. Do you have to write software? Of course not. But what I recommend people do is they go to Codecademy and they take a basic introduction course into Python. Okay. You could literally get all the digital fluency you need on software by just learning how Python, which is an interpreted language. I'm not going to get into those technical elements, but if you learn just how Python works and you can write a basic for loop in Python, that makes you digitally fluent in how software works. Okay. I think everyone needs to understand the concept of data operations. So converting just a raw event or a series of raw events into something that could inform me. So for example, a temperature, if I look at a temperature as a snapshot, so that is all I see is a number. It's the event. If I don't know that that has a unit of measure called Fahrenheit, then I don't know what the temperature actually is. That is data operations. Data operations is taking the temperature off of a sensor and adding in something else to turn it into information. Okay. If you have to have a basic understanding of data operations, I think you have to have a basic understanding of the software development lifecycle. So, and the reason software development lifecycle, it's because it's the most mature. You need to understand the concept that everything that all solutions, all problems I solve are going to be standing on the shoulders of all the other problems I've already solved. So as opposed to taking them as a standalone entity, right? Stand all by themselves. I think those are the things that people need to be focused on. And then what you do is you figure out how to apply those things to your domain of expertise already. And if you look at the breadth of our business, I'll focus on business development because they're generally the least technical people, right? We have our business development staff ranges in ages from early 60s all the way down to maybe 30 is the youngest. And if you look at the way our 63-year-old business developer, who by the way is a world-class sales guy, been doing it 30 plus years, absolutely slays it at every conference. He can sell $5 million in his sleep. I mean, the guy's just a beast, an absolute animal. If you look at how he does his job relative to how a 30-year-old business developer does her job, it's night and day. They're completely different. And the difference is he focuses a lot more on brute force, 100 calls a day, that kind of stuff.
Right.
And
the traditional way.
And she focuses on quality over quantity. And she's not a whale hunter, nothing like that. But she focuses on, let me start with the quality lead first and asking the question, how do I get the quality lead? And she uses technology to do that, right? She's focused on technology. Whereas the older sales guy is focused on the notebook and the Rolodex. And so to answer your question, what position should be focusing on? I wouldn't focus on the position. I would focus on the skill set, digital fluency, the stuff I laid out, and then figure out how to apply that to what it is you do.
Right. Yeah, it makes total sense. Right. Yeah, it's more of a mindset, cultural shift, and you're setting that foundation to be able to adapt to the things we can't predict right now.
I was watching an interview this morning when my habit is I wake up, I read, I go through a series of newspapers, I check my emails, I check my Discord messages, and then somebody had sent me an interview. Steve Martin did 2 decades ago, the comedian. Somebody had asked him, how do you break in? What do you tell people when they ask you how to break into Hollywood? And he said, well, there's no way you don't just break into Hollywood. He's like, you get discovered. And the way you do that, number one is start by understanding that your expectations of the job is never what the job actually is. Number two, be so good no one can ignore you. That's what digital does. Right. Digital makes it impossible for the gatekeepers to ignore you.
Right.
Like if you figure out a way to leverage digital, look at me. I can be a jerk. And a lot of it's by design, but I could be a jerk. You know what I mean? And but because of what I've done with digital, people can't ignore me. I'm a perfect case study. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Super interesting.
Yeah.
Now, here's a question from, and actually I'm going to lead into a question or a topic I've heard you talk about before, Walker, but this question that I'm going to start with is from Vaughn on LinkedIn. Vaughn says, how will AI affect the way people work in the future? What impact will it have on the jobs humans do? And I remember you talking, I think it was in our last podcast interview, you talked about the IQ, the average IQ of the average laborer, the average, not the laborer, but the average person in the labor force. How do you think AI is affecting people's jobs just in general and the skills they need to have other than that digital fluency that you're talking about?
Yeah. If you look, I mean, communication skills are really important. your ability to communicate with artificial intelligence is really critical. Okay. So that's where the IQ piece comes in. So the right now, the average employable IQ is around 73. That's set by the US Army. We know empirically, if we look at the way that skill sets change over time, the impact that artificial intelligence is going to do is it's going to AI and machine learning and automation are going to engineer out the positions that the IQs from 73 to the 90 working. Okay. Artificial intelligence is going to, what's going to end up happening is the average employable IQ is going to be somewhere in the mid 90s, which right now is about the mean in the West. Okay.
Right.
So what's going to happen is your entry level position is going to be the person who's on the mean in intelligence. Right. So that's a person who can think in abstract terms. So I can think in multiple layers. They can play chess. They're not limited to checkers. Okay. Right. So they can see multiple moves in the future, but also they have significant communication abilities. That is, they have the ability to speak effectively and they have the ability to write effectively. And that is the fundamental difference. It's going to make people who communicate in writing better at communicating and writing. And it is going to make them the time to value when they're solving problems is going to get shorter and shorter and shorter.
Right. Yeah. Very interesting. Now I want to come back to this unified namespace. And there's actually some questions coming in from the audience already about UNS. So let's just dive into that here for a second. First of all, I know you've got some strong opinions about unified namespace. Before we get into those though, tell us about what unified namespace is and what your strong opinions related to it are.
Sure. So unified namespace is an architecture I created between 2003 and 2005 in that salt mine I worked in. And it came from the problem of the salt mine is 7 miles long. Okay. And when I'm on shift, I'm the only technician on shift to cover the entire mine. Okay. We have all this smart stuff talking to each other over Data Highway Plus. So the Blue Hose. So serial network. We have all this stuff talking to each other. It's on a network, but not the network because we weren't using Ethernet at the time. How can I take all that data and put it in a place where I can quickly retrieve the information I'm looking for when someone calls about a problem? So when someone calls and says, hey, belt 40B, section A is out. It's just stopped. We have an indicator, a little light bulb on the thing. It's not running. How can I diagnose the problem without having to drive out there and look? How can I diagnose the problem first, then drive out there and fix? Okay. So, or fix from where I'm at. So unified namespace was all about organizing our business. First off, semantically organizing everything in a hierarchy, the way the business is structured, and then capturing all the events and then being able to manipulate that data into information for me. So how could I put together all the data points I need to diagnose that call when someone makes it? Okay. That's what unified namespace is. It is a architecture that is semantically organized. Think of it as a file share where all of the events in your business are coalesced. So every IO data point, the work order from the active work order from the ERP, the bill of materials we're using right now, all that stuff organized generally as ISA 95 part 2, which is enterprise site area line cell. And then we organize it based on function. So I might have an OEE namespace that's got the OEE calculation in it.
Right.
It provides context, all data in current context, and fully normalized, and it gives you current state. That's what unified namespace is. It is built on a common technology. So a unified namespace in general, we're using like broker technology. The most common is MQTT. That's what UNS is. It's an architecture that is the digital foundation of your infrastructure upon which you plug in all your software and you consume and produce into that unified namespace to solve problems for the business. We were talking about Odoo earlier here, right? You guys are in the ERP business. You guys did a video on Odoo called We Don't Talk About Odoo, right? Why is Odoo disrupting the ERP industry? You want to know one of the reasons why it's disrupting? Because you can plug Odoo into a unified namespace.
Right.
You can build an MQTT connector so it can produce and consume from a UNS. So you can extract from Odoo things like bill of materials, manufacturing operations, all those kind of things into a unified namespace. It's one key reason why Odoo is disrupting. right? But here's another reason. It's low code, no code. So that it can support citizen developers and citizen data analysts. So you guys even shot your own video on this and think about it. When we were at Digital Stratosphere, Epicor was there, right?
Right.
And I had a conversation with the new leadership at Epicor. I think they came from Oracle, right? And she was fucking amazing. I mean, really, sorry. She was amazing, right? And one of the things when I was talking to Epicor, I was talking to the executive leadership at Epicor about this. She acknowledged, she said, you know, the age of putting ERP at the center of your business is over. ERP is a function of the business. It's a node in the business. It needs to produce and consume. Even she was talking about the need for a unified namespace. But anyway, that's what UNS is.
Right. Yeah. So why is this, or first of all, let me back up. Is this a universal concept? It sounds like, you know, there's maybe some different philosophical views on is UNS the right answer or not. And, you know, I guess my question is, why is there pushback, or why isn't this more universally adopted, or is it becoming universally adopted at this point?
It's becoming, I mean, we just got back from Hanover Messe and UNS was everywhere. I mean, everywhere. Companies I never even heard of. Right? You know, in general, most people who want to make sure that their product supports a unified namespace, generally they'll reach out to us, or they'll reach out to a member of our community, or they'll join the Discord server and ask the Industry 4 community to kind of vet the product. But I even saw products I've never even heard of, you know, using unified namespace and UNS in their language. And most of them that I looked at, there were some that were just full of it, but most of the companies who are saying UNS they have the definition relatively right. The definition is it's loose. It's not a standard, and it was designed to be flexible. It's designed to UNS is built under the concept that there is one thing in manufacturing and industry that matters, and only one thing, and it's production. And on the plant floor, you do whatever it takes to get the widgets out the back door. No one, absolutely no one on the plant floor ever says, we can't do that because the ERP doesn't allow us to do that.
Right. So we're going to stop shipping product.
Yeah. They just, no one has ever done that. I've seen it with my own eyes. Hey, it says we're supposed to go here, 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 here. Well, that step right there, that machine's broken. And so we're going to literally run this production halfway through that asset. Then we're going to move the work in progress over to that asset, and we're going to finish on that asset. Guess what? Most ERP systems don't support that mitigation tactic, right? Unified namespace was designed to be able to at least consume the events when you take that mitigation tactic, right? But also to be a single source of truth for your business. Where do we currently stand when we do a DTMA, digital transformation maturity assessment? We're gauging digital maturity of organizations. We do these 23-point questionnaires and interview people in the organization. We're basically asking, what are you good at? What are you bad at? What's missing? Do you want to know what we've done? Almost 10,000 surveys total. So we have a large longitudinal sample. Do you know what 91% of respondents in manufacturing say is their biggest problem, the biggest what's missing?
Let me guess. Data?
It's the access to the data they need to do their job. 91%. 9 out of 10. Now, they may say it differently. It might be the supervisor might say something like, well, what I need is visibility into current state. That is, what are my assets are running? Where are we relative to plan? What he's saying is access to the data I need, but he may say it in a different way. 91% of respondents across the entire organization say the same thing. Access to the data they need to do their jobs. You want to know the best way to find out what an organization's problems are?
What's that?
Ask them for all the spreadsheets they built to solve problems.
Right.
You just ask me, let me look at the spreadsheets. The spreadsheet is always a functional solution to a specific business problem. And if you can inventory all those things, you know what the business's problems are.
Right. That's a great point. Yep. But a lot of times software vendors are trying to sell you software, say, oh, don't worry about those spreadsheets. You don't need to worry about that.
This is where our new conference, we're going to do Prove It. We're doing this conference in January next year, right? And by the way, I was originally going to reach out to you and say, hey, why don't we do this at Stratosphere? Why don't we do what we're going to try and do at Prove It at Stratosphere? The only reason I didn't was because our key sponsor requires that it's in Dallas because they're a Texas-based company. And actually, their headquarters are in Dallas. So But otherwise, I would have reached out to you. But we're doing this conference in January called Prove It, a whole new approach to conferences, and where we're gonna send all the vendors who are going to participate, and we're going to ask them to come and prove it that their solution can support a unified namespace. It can plug into an existing infrastructure, and it can start producing and consuming. And there are all these rules centered around it, like what we're going to do with the vendors. But why are we doing that? And the answer is because if you go to the average conference, one of the reasons I loved Stratosphere so much is because we talked about actual problems. We talked about actual use cases. We talked about the actual limitations in digital. We talked about the actual successes.
Right.
Most conferences are designed to trick executives. It's
right.
flashy. It's flash. It's marketing. It's designed to stand up your booth as quickly as possible, tear it down as quickly as possible, and go to the next conference and trick people with flash again.
Right.
I was at IFPAC, which is the largest life sciences conference in the United States. I spoke there in Washington, D.C. a couple of months ago. And they had a poster session where they had maybe 50 vendors in the exhibit hall. And I went through the exhibit hall and I asked, and all of them were selling to the same customers, right? They're all selling digital solutions. And what question do you think I asked them? I went and I said, how do I plug your thing? How do I connect your thing with his thing?
Right.
And the answer invariably was, well, we might have a connector for that, or we have an SDK, or you can't. And what blew my mind was that all of you are trying to sell stuff to the same customers, and yet none of you talk to each other.
Yeah.
Like,
it's super fascinating.
That's not digital. Go ahead. Sorry, man.
Right. Yeah. And it's almost as though, there's an assumption that my one solution is going to solve all your problems, when for most manufacturers, that's not true. You're going to need, like you said, ERP is not going to be the center stone. You're likely going to need multiple systems. You're still going to have some spreadsheets. You might still have manual processes. You've got to be realistic about what it is you're doing with
what people need to understand is that it's a journey. It's not a project. Digital transformation is a strategy. It's a strategy. It's not a project, and it's a journey. It's a journey that makes your organization smarter through making data the primary commodity.
Right.
You're not collecting the data for data's sake. You're collecting the data to turn it into information so that you can get smarter.
Right.
And as you get smarter, what you want changes. What we want is a function of what we know. And so if you look at the journey, organizations start really, really small. At least they should start tiny. They shouldn't be spending more than $40,000, $50,000 at the absolute most in the first 12 to 16 weeks of their digital journey. And that's proof of value.
Right.
But 3 years down the road, they've spent millions. Why? And they've gotten tens of millions in return. And why is that? Because they started small and they charted a path that allowed them to adjust as they exponentially got smarter, and their needs and wants changed by knowledge squared.
Right.
Yeah.
And as you learn, you start doubling down on those lessons and saying, okay, now we figured it out, or we kind of know directionally where we're going. Now let's start spending our millions of dollars rather than out of the gates. Let's just commit.
If you're spending your millions of dollars on scaling the solution that you've already quantified the ROI on.
So that was part of Eric and Walker's conversation about manufacturing in tech and Industry 4.0 and what that means for the future. If you want to watch that full interview, head over to episode 172, where you'll be able to watch not only that full interview, but the rest of the podcast that goes along with that interview. So going down to number 8, Eric, what do we got?
Yeah. So coming in at number 8 is lessons from ERP failures and lawsuits. And this is with Dr. Scott Jenke, who is a director of strategy and transformation. Actually, now he's a senior director of strategy and transformation here at Third Stage Consulting Group, which is the company that we work for. And this is back from episode 169 of Transformation Ground Control. Again, go to transformationgroundcontrol.com, and it's lessons from ERP failures and lawsuits with Dr. Scott Jenke. Some of the root causes, like if you were to summarize, the patterns that are pretty common in these different expert witness cases and or situations where we go into a client and help them get a project back on track because it's failed. And maybe it's not a lawsuit yet, but they'll hire us to come in and basically recover the project. In both sets of clients that you've been involved with, what would you say are sort of the major patterns or themes that contribute to the failure in general?
And we may talk about this later, but we don't typically see the technology itself as a key point of friction. Most of the systems that get selected can handle 99% of everything that a company wants it to do, with a few tweaks here and there. And having taught undergraduate and graduate classes in project management, it's interesting that some of these complex multi-million-dollar projects come down to the fundamentals of how a project should be run. Almost every client wants to get the system live as fast as possible. They skip the most important point or phase of the project. It's the planning, and making sure that what is the definition of success, right? What are we actually expected to achieve at the end of this project? Making sure that you have a feasible pace of the project. Many times they want to replace legacy systems plus process changes plus new functionality they don't have. And even at the very beginning, that's a 3+ year project. Well, I don't know what's going to happen next week, but I promise it's going to be different than what I'm thinking. But if you plan out a 3-year project, expect that it's going to take a lot of different left turns. And so the longer the project, the less likely you're going to stay on track. If you go into it with too much expectation, you put too much on the plate of the system integrator and your own team, likely to be a failure. But it's interesting that even in the world of agile methodology, and a lot of software development firms want to use that concept, it doesn't mean there shouldn't still be rigor. And one thing that we find, even when clients hire us to help from a PMO standpoint on an active project, very little documentation and very little updating of that documentation is our first big sign that something is wrong. Because if we get onboarded on a new project, in fact, we have an active project right now. It's a global multi-year, multi-million-dollar project. And we come in, the easiest thing for us to assess is give us all your documentation of where you are today. And if the answer is, well, we don't have too much documentation, or here's a document, we created it 2 years ago, we just haven't updated it yet, is our first big indication that something's off already. Because there's no way that the client team, the system integrator really understands where you are in the project and what, again, that end state is. I think that clients that don't have the expertise in this area still tend to want to engage with the system integrator directly. And you're at a disadvantage at that point if you don't really know how to implement an enterprise system. And yet you're hiring somebody that is the software vendor sometimes themselves to run it entirely. It tends to create problems of accountability. And we talk about this a lot in project management, of traceability of the project. So what was the original intent of the project? What was identified as requirements and approved by all parties at the beginning of the project? How does it move through configuration, testing, and deployment with test scripts and test scenarios and user stories? There isn't many times a traceability from the beginning and end that's easy for somebody like us, if we're hired midstream, to understand where we are. And so when we get hired as a legal expert, the first thing we ask the legal team is give us access to all, as you mentioned, videos, demos, documents, whatever it is. And if we get started in that, and it's very hard to start piecing things together, even at the very beginning, the hair on the back of our neck starts raising because it's just difficult for anyone in a big enterprise system to be able to understand where things are in flight if things aren't properly documented around the way. And I speak about this a lot to our clients, is that rarely is one methodology, waterfall or agile, ideal for a enterprise system. It's usually a hybrid form, but the problem is a lot of technology firms that implement systems use this concept of agile to get away from being required to document a lot of stuff, and that's a problem.
Yeah. I think in the spirit of agile, of moving fast and not slowing things down, not having a lot of red tape on your project, in that intent, a lot of times what happens is you end up with a lack of direction, and the project ends up going off the rails because you don't have clarity and documentation and alignment on what exactly it is we're trying to build.
Right.
What's always interesting is when attorneys first contact us, a lot of times what they say is, hey, we want to hire an expert like Third Stage to come in and really analyze the code A lot of times that's what the lawyers will say, hey, we want to analyze the code and really get in and show how it was a basically poor workmanship in the way that the software was built and deployed. And usually what happens is you start asking why, like why do you want to look at the code? Because usually, that's not going to be a winning argument. Typically in cases like these, it's going to be, to your point, all the other stuff. It's going to be the way the project was managed, the way you aligned the business processes or not with the software and vice versa. And usually the software itself, quote unquote, works, but it doesn't work for the business. And that's usually where the rub is, or where the challenge is.
We do occasionally get a legal expert, or expert witness case where the software vendor oversold what the platform can do at day one. Vaporware, it's on their roadmap kind of thing. And that's usually the extent that the software itself doesn't match the requirements it has, is that there's functionality that was oversold and it never became part of the project because it took the software vendor too long to develop that along the way. But rarely, to your point, it's the nitty gritty. Let's look at the code. Let's look to see how they've logged what they're doing in the comments in a code stream. Rarely do we need to get to that level, because it's rarely that's the reason a system failed or an implementation failed.
Right. Yeah. Great point. And here's a few questions that are circling around a common theme here from the audience. So I'm gonna pull up a couple of them and just try to summarize it here. But this is Fuad on LinkedIn says, what is the ideal number of people needed to operate per module? And then I'm gonna sort of build on this one by one here. And then Darian asks, how many people does the company that's doing the project need to put on their project team? And then this is kind of a funny response / rhetorical question from Paul on LinkedIn, who's responding to Darian's question, saying, how long is a piece of string? So I get what Paul's saying. It's hard to answer the question with clarity, but I'll ask it anyway. Or maybe I'll sort of frame it a little bit differently, or instead of giving us a number of like, what's the magic number of people you need on a project to ensure you don't fail? That's not a realistic question, just because it depends on so many different variables: scope, size of the company, complexity, is it full-time or part-time, all that stuff. So we won't necessarily get into that exact number, but maybe to frame it a little bit differently, when you're looking at these cases, when we're analyzing these failures, how often or how often is it related to the fact that the client themselves didn't have enough people supporting the project, or there's some sort of resourcing issue or input issue on the client side? How often does that happen? Sometimes. We would like to see clients in an active project have more full-time bodies on a project than a higher count, but less percentage associated with the project. So even in believe it or not, I think even a very large enterprise system doesn't require as many people as you think. Per work stream area, 3 to 5 is sufficient in many cases. But it's the amount of time the company is able to give those resources to the project. Because one of the things, and this is one of those areas where we see the client to blame, meaning the plaintiff or the organization funding the implementation, is that we require that the client, whether it's agile, waterfall, or some hybrid, actively agree and accept work product as it goes through the organization. So the need for approvals is quite high in an enterprise system. But when a lot of folks that are on the client side don't have the time to devote to the project, those approvals, those decision points get dragged out. And then you'll hear potentially the CIO or CFO tell the software implementer, stop dragging your feet, move forward. So then they get into a habit of saying, hey, I'm going to send over this piece of a document or this decision point for you. If I don't hear from you in a week or two, we're going to assume it's approved and we're going to move forward. That's a problem on all kinds of fronts. But many times the SI will do that because they're being forced to move forward and the client isn't providing the approvals on a timely basis. But the severity of those decisions still requires at some point for the project to pause until the client approves a major scope change or a different direction the project needs to take. So resources, it's more about full-time than total FTE count.
And it's also being engrossed in the decision making along the way. Do not defer to any software vendor or vendor in its basic form to make decisions on behalf of the client. If you start doing that, and then you realize the SI has gone down a wrong path, it's too late to say, I'm going to stop this project and sue you because you shouldn't have done that. Because we will ultimately find emails saying, hey, do what do you think is best? And that's a big problem.
That's a great point. You're sort of giving up, not your leverage necessarily, although you are giving up leverage in the future. If it gets to a lawsuit phase, you've sort of given, you've relegated blame, I guess, or you've taken on more blame at that point because you didn't, you didn't document what you needed or wanted. I'm going to get to a follow-up here question in just a second. But first I want to address this question from Ozzy on YouTube. Says, is this actually live? And I replied in the chat, yes, it is live. And if you'd like me to prove it further, if you'd like further evidence that this is live, ask another question and we'll answer it live here. How about that? Just to prove that we're live here today.
There you go.
But here's the real question I want to get to here. This is from Ganesh on LinkedIn. This is a super interesting question. I don't know that I've ever addressed this. I'm curious to see what you think, Scott. Ganesh says, traceability sounds good, but won't it lead to micromanaging and eventually a lack of trust? I've never heard of that question, but it's a great one. I really like that question. I'm curious to see what your thoughts are. How do you balance that, or how do you find that right balance?
Actually, I think it's the counter to that. The effort up front on the planning phase. And by the way, of all the most important phase of the project, kickoff, planning, config, design, test, train, deploy, planning is the most important aspect and most important phase of any project. Go slow to go fast. And in fact, we're doing a level set with a client right now, outside of an expert witness case, where we're kind of going backwards to clarify again, what's that definition of success? What are those ingredients that are going to be necessary to be in place for the system when it goes live to be successful? And so understanding that full scope of requirements to the level of, I can hand a book of requirements to a system integrator and they should have very few questions, right? Without that beginning phase or beginning starting point of traceability, you are going to require micromanaging along the way because there's not very little documentation at the beginning and very little documentation along the way. If I know what the scope is once we leave the planning phase, I have a pretty strong confidence the bulk of that, if not all of it, should be there when we're doing testing and training, right? So I actually think the more you document the fine points, the less you have to micromanage.
Yeah, it's a great point. And the more you ensure that you're all on the same page and you all have clarity of what it is you're trying to accomplish with the project, all that good stuff.
You brought up a question earlier, or somebody did, about resources. Let me address that as well. We see this frequently, not all the time, but frequently during an expert witness case, where the defendant, the software vendor, the software system integrator will say, well, you had a number of executives leave the company, are sponsors of the project, and so that caused the problem, or you had a lot of turnover on your project staff. Our feedback to that is, if you have proper documentation along the way, it should be very easy to onboard somebody, what the original scope was, the project charter, what the requirements are, and where you are in the phases of the project. Using turnover as an excuse of, well, we had to re-educate folks and that caused a lot of delay in the project doesn't fly well, because I think the documentation and proving and tracking where you are on the project would cover any kind of issues that resource changes would happen. And quite honestly, on the flip side, we hear that quite often with the system integrator is, we have a problem with the project because the SI had a lot of turnover of staff.
Yeah.
Again, with proper documentation, the onboarding process should be very straightforward for them to get up to speed very fast. Without documentation, it's learning over the shadow and the shoulder of other individuals on the project. And that's the problem for a lot of clients.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and along these same lines, I was actually hoping this person was watching this live. This is from Marcus Harris, who is a attorney, by the way, and he Just as a side note, we've done work for him, and we've been a client of his in the past for cases he's been involved with. And he's a lawyer that specializes in contract-related issues as well as lawsuits like this. So if you're in the unfortunate situation of needing an attorney in a situation like this, he's a great guy to contact. But anyway, Marcus is watching in on YouTube, it looks like, and he asked the question, what documents are the most important to mitigating the risk of failure? For example, statements of work, project plans, et cetera. So is there a certain type of documentation that you think is the most important to have to sort of mitigate that risk?
Well, the statement of works are important just because that's a very heavy, influential, little legal contract document, right? It tells about scope and assumptions, constraints, but most ERP or enterprise implementations take years. And there's quite a few change orders that are likely to happen. So that's more of a point in time. It's really getting into the design documents, the configuration documents, and the true set of requirements, whether that's in a tool like Jira or it's simply in an Excel spreadsheet or other tracking items. The design documents and the requirements are by far the biggest influences of what is going to be done on the project. But on top of that, most enterprise systems have change orders. It could be a schedule change, a scope, budget, or the like. When those changes take place, there are certain documents like design documents, like the requirements, that need to be refreshed frequently to accept that. I refer a lot of this to building a custom house or an office building, is that the original blueprints are not what the as-builts are at the end of it. And when you don't have updates that take place with even a few number of documents, like I mentioned, becomes a problem at the end, because if I was the CIO or COO or president, I want to know what that SOWs look like, what the change orders were, what those design docs and requirements were, should reflect what I'm getting at the end. But most people create project plans. Obviously, SOWs are a point in time. Things happen along the project, whether it's a change order or not, and nothing gets updated to reflect that. No meeting notes, no status reports, things like that. So at the end of the project, it's very hard to figure out how we got here. But it's really about I would say the architectural plans of a project are probably the most important, but they have to be in layman terms. The staff that the client is going to put on the project rarely are IT experts, and certainly are not in that system, because they wouldn't have hired an SI to do it in the first place. So it needs to be in very layman terms what is to be expected during the config and development phase.
So that was the number 8 most popular podcast interview of 2024. That was Dr. Scott Janke from the Third Stage Consulting team, chatting with us about the lessons from ERP failures and lawsuits. And if you'd like to see that full episode, go to transformationgroundcontrol.com and check out episode 169. We have a full hour-long interview with Scott that we just played you an excerpt from. So be sure to check that out. So we're just getting started here on the top 10 list. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll get through more of this top 10 list. We've got 7 more to go. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff related to smart factories, AI, business process management, top ERP systems of the year, all this good stuff. So you don't want to miss out. Be sure to stay tuned. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control. I recently published my first book. It's called The Final Countdown, Strategies to Reach the Third Stage of Digital Transformation. And I wrote this book because I really wanted to find a concise way to share some of my knowledge around digital strategy and how to get started on a digital transformation journey. So in this book, I cover 3 different sections. I cover the people, process, and technology aspects of transformation, with the idea that it's meant to be a starting point, a launching pad for organizations and team members that are going through digital transformations. So I encourage you to buy this book. You can get it electronically, you can get it paperback, or you can get it in hard copy, as I'm holding here in front of you. You can get it by going to thefinalcountdown.com. You can also search for it on Amazon if you shop at Amazon. Otherwise, just go to thefinalcountdown.com. Love to hear your feedback on this book as well. So I hope you check it out and hope you enjoy.
Interested in working for a company that truly values your unique skills and experience? Here at Third Stage, we don't hire based on resumes alone. We look at the full candidate, experience, and willingness to provide excellent service for our clients. Within a technology independent and agnostic consulting firm, you have the opportunity to learn across industries with a diverse group of clients. Our consultants also have the opportunity to diversify their portfolio and learn across technology systems. If you're interested in joining a high-growth entrepreneurial organization, please reach out to us at work@thirdstage-consulting.com.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 200. My name is Kimberling here at Darian Chwialkowski. We're doing a countdown here of the top 10 interviews of the year for this podcast. And this podcast is the tech agnostic podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation, sponsored by Third Stage Consulting Group, which is an independent tech agnostic digital transformation consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformations. So we're going through the top 10 list here based on popularity, based on the interviews that got the most engagement and the most interest for 2024. And tell us about number 7, Darian.
Yeah, number 7 is a very recent interview that Eric did by himself, actually. So this topic was digital transformation trends and predictions for 2025, a very interesting episode looking into the future here. And you can find this on episode 198. So just a couple episodes back if you want to watch the full thing.
Digital transformations are going to fail at an increasing rate for a few reasons. One is, and actually it's a few reasons that we've already discussed. The increased pace of change. Anytime technology changes as fast as it is, that just puts more pressure on organizations, and it creates more confusion and potential paths to failure, if that makes sense. So there's more, when technology is changing that quickly, organizations have more trouble keeping up with the pace of change. And that just puts more strain on those organizations to change faster than they're potentially really conditioned to do. Not saying you shouldn't change and you should just ignore change. That's not at all what I'm saying. But I am saying, back to that point of change resiliency and being able to lead an organization through change, I think those are all really important things that need to happen as a result of these sorts of initiatives. So when you think about that increased pace of change, and then you also add to the fact that you have this mass migration of organizations throughout the world that are moving from their legacy on-prem system to their cloud-based system in a relatively short period of time, in a relatively compressed period of time, because of some of the vendor sunsetting issues and just the pace of change in general, that's putting more pressure on organizations to go through change that they're not necessarily ready for, and they're not necessarily prepared to succeed. And so that's why it's so important for organizations to make sure they have a clear vision of where they want to go, and make sure they have a clear direction and alignment as an organization before they jump too far into the overall project. So I think the increase in failures will absolutely increase. We just see too many organizations that are struggling right now with that cloud migration, and the forced fast migration, shortage of skills. That's actually another prediction that I'll just call out here now. Is one of the predictions is, skills shortages have been an issue for years now. It's nothing new in 2025. That is something that'll continue and probably accelerate in 2025, because you get, for example, all these companies that are scrambling now to go from SAP ECC to S4HANA. There's only so many SAP consultants in the world that know what they're doing and are good. And those consultants are all in high demand right now, because you have so many organizations that are going through these changes all in a relatively short period of time. So that skill shortage creates more pressure on organization and increases the rate or the probability of failure even more. So you've got to look at all these underlying currents here, these undercurrents in the industry, and say, how does this affect us, and how do we mitigate the risks of all these things we're talking about? And the good news here, it may sound like I'm saying it's all bad news because there are risks and there's challenges, but the good news is there's ways to mitigate those risks and challenges, and ways to overcome them. And it's just a matter of being aware of them. With skills shortages, for example, you may have to assume your project's going to take you a little longer than you might otherwise expect, or that might otherwise be realistic. I mean, I think in general, most organizations are very unrealistic about how long an implementation takes, but even more so nowadays when you add up all these different factors, the skills shortages, the increasing pace of change, the fact that vendors are changing their software so quickly, the fact that businesses are dealing with a bunch of challenges, supply chain issues and economic issues and potential layoffs, acquisitions. There's all these other things happening that have nothing to do with technology that are also putting pressure on these organizations. And at some point, something's got to give. And oftentimes these technology initiatives end up paying the price or end up taking longer than expected or costing more than expected because of all these other internal and external dynamics that are contributing to some of the difficulties that organizations face when they're going through these implementations. So skill shortages, that's something else that I think will be a challenge here in the coming years. But I'm curious to hear from you, what other trends do you see, or what other trends are you most excited about in the digital transformation space? I'd love to hear your thoughts here, whether you're someone implementing ERP systems right now, or whether you're a consultant or whatever the case may be. I'd love to hear your feedback. Speaking of feedback, here's another comment from Karim on LinkedIn. Another quick one. Are all market leading vendors truly equal in their enterprise software capabilities? And I would say no, they're not. I mean, I'd say they're all good. You know, if you look at market leading vendors, at least the brand names like SAP and Oracle and Microsoft, Infor, Epicor, or a couple more, Workday, of course, NetSuite. Those are some of the leading, what I would consider some of the leading enterprise software vendors. But I wouldn't say they're equal. I mean, I think they all have their strengths and weaknesses, and they all have their areas of focus. Certain ones are better at certain types of organizations or with certain types of industries, but you really have to make sure you understand more than anything just what your own needs are and what your priorities are. And once you know what your needs and priorities are as an organization, then looking to the software solutions that are out there to figure out which one or ones are going to provide you, the best fit with what you're looking for. That's why going through an objective and comprehensive evaluation process is so important, to make sure that you find the software and you find the nuances in these different software solutions, because they are all very different and they have different strengths and weaknesses for certain. Here's another comment from Pranesh on LinkedIn. Pranesh says, lots of ERPs are using AI effectively. Workday already has a good use of this in features such as candidate ranking, skill ranking, etc. So keeping data clean for a decent long time can really help companies take the AI skills, utilize the predictions better. Great example. And those are great examples of how a software vendor, in this case Workday, is using AI to sort of build into their systems some additional competencies around candidate ranking and skill ranking in these two examples. So those are all great examples of things that will certainly help. And we're certainly, AI can make those existing functions even better than they might have been otherwise. So thank you for that feedback, Pranesh. I also want to get back to this concept of AI. I'd love to hear, for those that are just joining or maybe missed the earlier part of the conversation, or maybe you've had more time to think about it, if you've been on this discussion for a while now. But I'd love to hear from you on where you think you could see AI being used in your business or in businesses in general. Do you see it being used in certain ways now? Do you see possibilities of AI being used to improve businesses in certain ways in the near future? Love to hear your feedback, because I think this is something that's really important, because so many organizations are struggling with how to leverage AI and how to get value out of AI as well, rather than just talking a lot about it, or creating, or focusing on all the buzz. There's a question from Sid on LinkedIn. Sid says, from a system architecture perspective, a hybrid architecture with on-premise and cloud creates challenges to keep the lights on while going through a cloud upgrade. This is often overlooked and leads to delays, as the right resource cannot be at the right place at the right time, as staff downsizing and resource allocation leads to staffing and planning challenges. So I think the key thread here that I'm picking up on, or the key point, is keeping the lights on with your existing on-prem systems while you're going through this transition to the cloud. And in the process, assuming you're not doing like this massive big bang approach, which most organizations don't do, but assuming you're going to have to move through this interim phase where you have some cloud systems and some on-prem systems, that's where it becomes real challenging. And there's a lot of interim integration to manage, a lot of interim data reentry and rekeying and data governance that becomes an issue, because now you're managing multiple environments. And for some organizations, this isn't even just temporary. It's not just an interim process. It becomes longer term, because they might have some legacy on-prem systems that they have to keep or they want to keep. And then they've got cloud systems that are maybe their core ERP systems that now need to integrate with those on-prem systems. So those are all big issues that need to be managed for certain. And, it also brings up the importance of increased cybersecurity risk. Cybersecurity is becoming more and more important, and it's becoming more common that organizations struggle with cybersecurity. And the reason I'm bringing this up in the context of Sid's comment a moment ago is because when you start talking about these hybrid environments where you have some on-prem, some cloud systems, it may be important from an operational perspective. There may be very good reasons, regulatory reasons, or functionality reasons why you might have these hybrid environments. So I'm not here to necessarily say hybrid environments are good or bad, but one of the risks of hybrid environments is, even if, let's assume you've got a core cloud system that has world-class cybersecurity controls and cybersecurity protection that's going to protect you from all these bad outside hackers and nefarious actors and potential internal employee breaches, all that stuff. Let's just say you've got this hypothetical situation where you've got these cloud systems that are pretty well locked down. If you have a hybrid situation where you also have now some on-premise systems that are accessing or integrating to those back office cloud systems, now you've increased another entry point or a potential, a potential lapse, a point of weakness in your systems, because now a hacker is probably going to go attack your old on-prem system to get to your cloud system, even though your cloud system is pretty well locked down, has good cybersecurity controls in place and that sort of thing. Now you've increased the vulnerability, though, by adding on this on-prem system. And that's how a lot of these security breaches are happening now. When you look at, I think it was the SolarWinds breach from a couple of years ago, that massive breach that SolarWinds had. There was, if I remember correctly, I think that was the one where they accessed the core system and brought down the core system. They accessed it through a backdoor, and that backdoor was a third-party bolt-on system that didn't have good cybersecurity controls. So that's why I say cybersecurity is just going to continue to be a challenge, partially because you've got these hybrid environments. You've got a lot of companies that are going through technology change, and that just increases a certain amount of cybersecurity risk right there because of that. But then you also have the just increase in cybersecurity sophistication, or not cybersecurity sophistication, but criminal sophistication, I guess you'd say, when it comes to hacking and attacking networks and trying to access and steal data. Hackers are just getting more and more advanced in their approaches. I know within our organization, it's just crazy how sophisticated some of these phishing and spoofing spams have become, and not spoofing spams, spoofing scams. How big that's become in just in our business, in our here at Third Stage. That's been a big challenge for us. So I can only imagine a big, massive organization with tens of thousands of employees just has that many more thousands of opportunities to create a human lapse that leads to a cybersecurity issue, or it's more of a technical attack on the infrastructure because of the physical cybersecurity weaknesses of the system. So I think those are all things that lead us to more increased cybersecurity risk, and these are things that we absolutely need to focus more on. And it is something that is becoming more important and trendy. You have the chief information security officer now. You didn't used to have that position. It used to just be sort of a function within the CIO role, but now you've got the CISO role that's focused on information security, cybersecurity, that sort of thing. And I think organizations are finally realizing that their technology and their data, their intellectual property, it's all wrapped up in these systems, and they have to protect their assets just like they protect their money and their buildings and their physical inventory and everything else. Same goes for your technology. Your technology is arguably even more important for a lot of organizations, a lot more important than the physical assets they might have in terms of buildings or inventory or products, whatever the case may be.
All right, so that was Eric's digital transformation trends and predictions for 2025. Again, if you want to watch the whole clip, so head to 198 if you want to watch the full discussion about all those trends and predictions for 2025. We are at number 6 now. I'm going to hand it over to Eric to tell us what we got.
Yeah, so coming in at number 6 is a really interesting topic. This is the future of smart factories and Industry 4.0. So if you're part of a manufacturing organization or a supply chain intensive sort of organization, this is really interesting. And we had Adam, Dave, and Ken from a company called PCG Services on the show to talk about the future of smart factories and Industry 4.0. So let's roll the clip. This is the number 6 most popular interview of this podcast for 2024. The foundational level of understanding smart factories. Let's just talk about what is a smart factory. We start with the real basic stuff. Can we start with you, Adam?
Sure. So I'll probably hand it off here in a moment to give a little more nuanced view with my team. But for me, actually Industry 4.0 can mean a lot of different things to different people, and smart factories in particular, right? So for some companies, that's really, getting into like how am I using robotics in my factory to perform physical activity. For the context of today's conversation, what we're really talking about is how are the various technologies that are in place within the kind of the IT infrastructure of a company, their security, their authentication, the different solutions that compose their ecosystem. So the enterprise system, maybe they have a WMS system, maybe they have an asset management system, certainly a smart factory solution like we bring to the table that's more focused around shop floor types of activities. Those are all together in an integrated framework, right? So in that framework, there's basic foundational elements that you need to have, right? So a data framework, an integration layer, of course, the applications themselves, and then the means by which those solutions are talking together, and in particular with machines and being able to face with IoT enabled devices, right? So that's kind of the fabric, if you will, of the customer's environment. And a lot of those solutions today are, I think, built generally more towards kind of their space that they're filling within the market, other than kind of like the integration layers. And so what we're doing is we're kind of trying to flip the lens and we've built our solution to kind of blend those solutions together and work together and do it more from the view of what the customer experience is going to be and how their particular need is going to be met across an ecosystem as opposed to within the context of a particular application. So that's kind of my view of it. Dave, you probably have more to say on this subject, so I'll pass it off to you and Ken.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. And we'll dig deeper as we go forward, but there's really 4 pillars that we think about as you think about smart factory, right? Because words mean different things to different people, but the 4 pillars for us, and again, we'll peel back as we go further into discussion, is, the first thing is, right, it's all about how do we create an environment for success. That's the first pillar. And that normally means that you have to be integrating with your system of record. And that system of record for most customers is the ERP system. So it's extremely important that your manufacturing systems have that real or near real-time integration to that system of record. So that's one. Number 2 is you have to have real-time or near real-time control of your shop floor and your shop floor process. And, traditionally that might be referred to as an MES or as a SCADA system or as the distributed control system, but those typically have been standalone. But they need to begin to be integrated to support that Industry 4.0, Industry 5.0, and some of the other technology like AI and machine learning that's coming out. The third pillar, as you really begin to think about it, is we cannot forget about the frontline operators. They play a crucial role in terms of the human intelligence that they provide. But more importantly, we have to make them aware of how the process is performing so that while the process is performing, they have the ability to be proactive against anything that might be causing an off schedule or a variant condition to what they would otherwise expect. So being able to change that habit or that behavior of that operator is extremely important by giving them the relevant information that they need. But as important is the interface that we give to them for that vehicle to share that information has to be extremely user friendly to support that adoption process and to make the process of smart factory sticky. And the last pillar that we'll continue to talk about is obviously having the right types of analytics and the right types of metrics and KPIs so that you have that line of sight visibility in near real time as possible. because we all know that you have to have not only a rear view mirror view of your business, but you need to have more of a windshield view of your business. So having those right analytics and those right reports and scorecards are extremely vital to helping a customer to drive that continuous improvement.
Gotcha. What are your thoughts, Ken?
Well, to kind of tag with Dave a little bit, when you think about the umbrella, to echo a couple key points, integrating to that system of record implies that the platform of which the business is running and all of the different roles within that enterprise need to be engaged together, looking at data that is consistent with good integrity so they're all able to perform their roles appropriately, and then taking advantage of, and I'm a shop floor guy, so the connected operator is really important to us, and it's critical that everyone within the organization, back to those metrics, that real-time visibility Dave spoke of, everyone is reacting to what's appropriate for the role that they perform, and they're all seeing it through the lens in which they need to execute their responsibility, but it's a consistent presentation. I'm sure everybody that's participating today has lived through scenarios of, we thought we had a great series of bundled disparate systems that everybody thought they were doing the right thing until we realized we weren't all using the same information. And there were a lot of unintended consequences. In an Industry 5.0 environment, everything is synthesized. The system, the operator, the equipment, nobody's left out of the mix. That's been the big step forward from 4.0, when there was such a focus on equipment and taking advantage of technology that kind of the operator tended to get left behind. And it's that human intelligence that's right there at the point of execution, because we can't rely on even the most sophisticated distributed control system to do everything for us. Nothing is that completely automated.
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting that you guys are sort of calling out an important differentiator here, in that you've got your system of record, which oftentimes is an ERP system or some sort of back office system, but then there's other technologies that typically are required to do the other things you're talking about. And so I think it's important, as we talk through this, to recognize that it's not as simple as just putting in an ERP system and assuming that's going to enable your smart factory and give you the automation that you're looking for, is sort of what I'm hearing so far. And Ken, you just sort of touched on the concept of Industry 4.0, and I've heard you mention Industry 5.0 as well. What is the difference? So what we just talked about was smart factory. Is there a difference, or what is the difference between smart factory, Industry 4.0, Industry 5.0? Like, as we hear these buzzwords and these terms in the industry and in the media, how do we unpack that? How do we get our heads around what the differences are, if there are any? I'll start with you, Adam.
Well, from my point of view, the smart factory is a component of Industry 4.0. They are somewhat synonymous, but to me, it's Industry 4.0 is an overarching thing which can go beyond what we're talking about today. To me, the difference between Industry 4.0 and 5.0 is Industry 4.0 is really focused on the integration and the communication between all of these disparate technologies. And having the right foundation, or having a foundation. Industry 5.0 is taking it to that next phase. I'm saying, okay, beyond working in a prescribed way, what's going to best serve the human, right? So how are we building solutions, and how are we giving them the ability to connect into the different platforms in a way that is focused on their needs, the insights they need, the activities they need to perform, and in a way that's related to their business processes, as opposed to simply connecting the different solutions together. So from my point of view, it's that human focus which really differentiates 4.0 and 5.0. I know that's a topic for a lot of people to have different varying opinions, but for me, that's the most important element.
And Eric, I would add from the way that we think of 5.0 with smart factory, and it's one of the reasons why we've built smart factory, our solution set, the way that we have is, Ken touched on it, Adam's touched on it, that over the years customers have invested in multiple business systems. In some cases, customers have anywhere between 15 to 30 different standalone business systems. Whether it's an ERP, whether it's a LIM system, whether it's an Historian, a SCADA system, it goes on and on and on, standalone quality systems, etc. And part of the vision of 5.0 is how do you bring all these disparate and siloed business systems together in a way that harmonizes and aggregates data in a meaningful way, that it presents it to the different user groups that Ken said. And so a lot of legacy systems, a lot of legacy MES systems that are out there, they don't really do that very effectively without there being a very extensive, heavy engineering lift to build that as a one-off solution. And what we've done purposely here at PCG is to say, to support that Industry 5.0 vision, we need to have the next generation technology platform that allows us to integrate with that system of record, that allows us to integrate with that standalone quality system, that allows us to integrate with that machine PLC, or to be able to bring in data that today is only collected manually. And we need to have that ability to create that in a consumable way that then easily presents it to the different user communities so that they can begin to act upon it. And so that concept of having a next generation platform that allows you to stitch all this together is extremely critical to drive that correlation of those outcomes of interest that customers are always trying to control, whether it be around cost, quality, service, throughput, etc. And you touched on something, I think, a little bit earlier that's extremely important, is that most ERP systems, right, are transactionally based systems. They do not support operation-based information. They don't have the ability to really capture data in real time like a manufacturing system can. But what we need to be able to do is to automate as much as that transactional information as possible by taking that data from the shop floor, whether it's from the machine, whether it's from a quality system, whatever the case may be, and allow those transactions to be automatically updated. That's part of what our smart factory solution does as well. And that's important because what it does is it takes a lot of those resources that today are being more administrative and entering data after the fact, and it converts those resources into more value-added resources where now you can spend more time analyzing the data and improving the processes as opposed to just recording the data. And so that's part of our vision as we go forward with our smart factory solution set and approach as well.
Right. Right. How about you, Ken?
Well, what I would suggest to the audience and what we've tried to do, and Dave hit on it very well, is when you look at your enterprise, and it could be a series of locations that could have grown through acquisition, you could be one location, and even within one facility, you may have different value streams, different vintages, different OEMs. So, to Dave's pillars of the smart factory, there's a couple common tenets. That system of record is a common tool used by all. And the only other consistent process or element of the process are the people that need to perform and execute reliably, predictably at the appropriate quality and cost level every day to hit that service threshold. So the key is, with Industry 5.0 and automation, everybody doesn't have the resources to chase the newest piece of technology. And Adam mentioned robotics earlier. Hey, in many ways, the prudent Industry 5.0 practitioner, to Dave's point, can even take a manual process and with the right smart factory tools, elevate the game of the organization in such a way that predictability and reliability and efficiency just become a natural thread of what happens every day. And the operators appreciate not having a robot to do their work with them, but, really having the right tools to be involved, to be engaged, and knowing they're doing the right thing, whether it be work instructions to guide them or the right reporting elements that they know they're on track, or to Dave's point earlier, visibility too, and clarity that their process is in control and they are just clicking right along.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes total sense. And there's a lot of reference that you guys have made so far to data and just the whole concept of capturing data. Where does the data reside? How does it integrate back to the system of record and vice versa? That was a number 6 interview of the year, which was the future of smart factories in Industry 4.0 with Adam Combs, Dave Gustovich, and Ken Staresinic from a company called PCG Services. So if you like that interview, you want to learn more about that topic, or you like those guests, go to episode 171 at transformationgroundcontrol.com. You can watch the full episode there. So we're halfway through our top 10 list here. We've still got 5 more to go, the 5 most popular interviews of the year. We're going to get to those top 5 here in just a moment. But first, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
I'm excited to announce the release of our 2025 Digital Transformation Report. It's available now on the Third Stage Consulting website, www.thirdstage-consulting.com. This report gives you an unbiased, technology-agnostic insight to help you optimize your organization's projects for success. Get your copy today using the QR code in front of me or on our website.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S/4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 200. This is the countdown of the top 10 interviews of 2024 from this podcast. This podcast is the tech agnostic podcast that covers all things related to digital transformation, including strategy, people, process, and technology. The show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting, which is an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journey, and it's the company that we're involved with as well. We're down to our top 5 here, Darian. Number 5 on our list. What do we have here?
Yeah, number 5 was a great interview. This interview was with JJ Vossen from Mavim. This was from episode 161, and the topic was business process management and digital transformations. Let's roll this clip.
Kyler says, JJ, can you parallel path the two, select new technology and BPM optimization, or do you recommend? And this is back to Alcinda's point too. She was suggesting what I would consider the ideal state. If you have the time and resources and the vision to do this, do your BPM work, choose the technology or technologies, then do additional BPM work in more detail once you start implementing the technologies. What about doing in parallel BPM with software evaluation and selection?
Yeah, I would say again. First of all, I would say depending on the case we're talking, that's of course. But yes, I would say why not? Because then step by step, let me give the politics. Step by step, people say, okay, we're already on the journey.
Right.
So we're not only in the mode of thinking, because people don't like that. People want to see results. So that's a little bit, it's more or less, I would say this is a maybe potentially political correct way of doing.
Yeah.
So you start, for example, for argument's sake, we made a decision. We are going for best of breed. So let's first focus on the supply chain. So then, okay, let's say supply chain. In the meantime, look for one of those 3, 4, 5, 6 vendors that are one of the best of breed leaders in that space. Let's go for that. I know those customers that do that. We do that first, and then we go for whatever customer facing, customer journey.
Right.
Do it there again, and take there a best. But again, BPM leading, software to follow.
Right.
But yes, I can imagine that is politically correct, and people will see then sort of results.
Yeah.
But again, very important. There's one word also: don't rush.
That's a good point. Yeah, I don't want to say you should take all the time in the world. You shouldn't take all the time in the world, but you should take plenty of time up front to do the planning work that includes business process management. And back to that decision latency comment earlier about the team's ability to make quick decisions during an implementation. You're going to make quicker decisions if you have that clarity defined up front, because now you've got the blueprint for how you're going to build the house. To use that analogy. You would never, we wouldn't go out and hire a general contractor to go build a house without giving them the blueprint, or without someone giving them the blueprint of how the software should be built or how the house should be built. So why would we do the same thing? Why would we do that?
Exactly. And again, therefore, this business process blueprinting is meant to get everybody on board. That yes, of course, the why we change, but also the how we change. If that's agreed up front, and then you run the workshops in the greater details, you don't fall into the big trap that people start to argue, why are we changing anyway?
Right.
Before you know, you're back on square one.
Yeah.
And then you will lose the time, because then it has to escalate. So decision makers have to support it. Before you know, you get in brutal politics.
Yeah.
So you better be upfront agreed, and then it can move fast. Because then people think, yeah, I understand.
Right.
And if then a screen is blue or green, nobody cares.
Yeah. Yeah.
As it's logic, I understand it. Okay, I know my role. I know my career, very important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it will go fast.
Yeah. You're touching on an important topic that I want to get into a little bit more, which is change management, as you talk about executive sponsorship and resistance to change and decision making and leadership. All those things sort of tie back to change management. How does business process management enable change management or effective change management?
So our platform is branded by Gartner as a future digital twin of an organization technology. In that technology, we consider, of course, the basics are processes related to people, roles, responsibilities. One of the very important components of the platform is the communication and collaboration. So if and when, and then that means also communication means if I'm a board member, I'm not interested in detail level 6 of a process. I'm interested in what is it going to bring on the 5 strategic intents. I understand that. I understand the word strategic intent, goals, KPIs. But then I'm somebody in a warehouse. I do want to understand the details of a process, but then visualized in a way that I see a visualization where I see, that's a forklift. Of course, that's me on a forklift in a process. Oh, how neat is that? So the communication of the process future way of working should be by the lens of the individual. So the enterprise architect will look at it from an architect standpoint. Somebody on the ground will look at it from his little forklift, and the other one thinks in intents. That's communication. Now that we are in agreement, then we need to ask the people, please confirm. The collaboration platform, it's Microsoft Teams and all that stuff. Confirm, agree, and if not agree, comment. So that people get the feeling, I'm engaged. I decide my own destiny, so that nobody can then say, typical Dutch, not invented by myself, it cannot be anything. So, no, you were engaged. You had comments. Look here. So we're all in agreement. Let's go. And that takes time. But again, a platform will support that. It is measurable. And also very important, if certain people don't comment, hey, now suddenly, that's a potential area of, hey, what's going on? So right. BPM in a platform like this Mavim platform will support the adoption of change.
Right.
And that is so important. If people don't want whatever you want as a we had this Hans Mulder, this professor. It was in time delivered. It was in budget.
Mm-hmm.
But what happened? Yeah, nobody used it.
Yeah, no business value.
Yeah, no, and nobody used it. Of that group in whatever Italy or wherever, they didn't use it. Yeah, big failure.
Yeah.
So then again, you need to make sure that people are committed to work. We have customers where the people said, "When do we get the system? I can't wait for the change." That is the dream.
Yeah.
That's the dream.
Yeah.
When do I get the system?
Yeah, because we're so excited to use it. Yeah.
So they understand. Hey, this will bring better and let's say smart work.
Yeah.
Versus all that labor intense, not that clever work.
Yeah. Yeah. The manual searching of information, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Also, at the heart of business process management, in the heart of Alcinda's question a moment ago, or her comment about where business process management fits and how the timing should work, there's also current state, future state. And so really at the heart of change management is how is the organization changing? And we can't be good at change management. We can't do change management well if we don't understand current state versus future state. And so at the heart of BPM is really a way to capture that, to kind of look at the way things are today, more importantly, how everything's going to be in the future and what are the gaps. And that becomes the premise for how you communicate and how you handle change management. So I think that's another reason why BPM is so important. But you were talking about business value or lack of thereof, of people not using the software. Congratulations, you finished the time on budget. Congratulations, you finished on time, but people aren't using the system. So is that a success? Some might say, yes, that was a successful project because you were on time on budget. Most, I think you and I would agree, it's not a success if you're not getting people to use it. How does BPM help people or help organizations get better usage of the software and better value out of the technology?
So let's say, again, good preparation, good give them feeling that they're engaged. And then at the end, what's also important, and that's what we created, that we are, in any engagement, we are part of the core new application. So we make sure that we have on this is maybe very technical, but on screen level, we have an integrated view. So if and when somebody in the morning, first day, he gets engaged, he starts a new application, and he said, "Oh, I had my training, but oops, what?" In the case of Mavim, press the help button. You are in this order entry. Okay, help. Then contextual help will start, and you will see your role in this situation, in this screen. This is your work instruction, totally integrated, so that people, first of all, know whatever happens, there's always help. Clarity, and also very important. And one of the classic examples, people say in the morning, "Oh yeah, let me call the support desk, guys." I know customers that said we shut down the support desk for phones. You need to first go to help. Because you can see that if they didn't press the button help, guess what? You don't get help. You need first to figure it out yourself, and then if you don't know, then you have to send in a ticket. So now you send a ticket that will be passed to ServiceNow. Ticket is supported, and immediately the support desk sees, this professional was in that order entry screen. Oh yeah, And oh yeah, indeed, he's right. Because of course, after go live, there will be for sure things that can improve.
Right.
But that's the way to do it. So it's totally integrated. And then people have to comment. And then of course, support desk need to respond very fast. So people get the comfort feeling, oh yeah, I get help. And then of course people will not moan, and they will adopt to the new way of working, and they will not do what's also classic. Sometimes people say, yeah, let's have the old system to the left and the new system to the right.
Mm-hmm.
No, it has to be only the new system.
A non-digital twin is what that's called.
Non-digital twins.
manual twin.
So the big trick we have is that is very neat. That it's integrated. So the process of the business into the application process, into the screen. Click and you see it. So you can use it for training purposes. You can use it for sport purposes, but also in your. And now after 1 year, somebody comes to the corner and he says, "I want to pay cash." Oh, how to handle a cash transaction? Okay, help. Cash, work instruction.
Right. That's a great points.
So that was the clip from JJ Vossen and Eric's discussion. That again was from episode 161. So if you want to find the full interview and the full podcast, head over to 161 to watch that full discussion. And the next number 4 is actually a very good discussion. Eric, what is number 4?
Yeah, so number 4 was the second of 2 podcast segments that featured just me. We tried to include as many as possible with other guests, but this one was particularly popular, mainly because this topic is always popular. No matter who we have talking about it, it's going to be popular, and that is the top ERP systems of 2025. This is from episode 182, and this is where I actually take some live audience questions and just talk through some of the leading ERP systems, pros and cons, strengths and weaknesses, where they best fit in different types of organizations. So let's roll this clip from episode 182, top ERP systems of 2025. Going through this, keep in mind, we are not affiliated with any software vendor we're talking about here today, nor are we affiliated with any of the software vendors we're not going to mention here today. So this is just us being independent, tech agnostic advisors to companies. Want to share what we think as far as pros and cons of these different systems, but also more importantly, I want to hear your feedback on what you think. You might agree with some of the stuff I say, you might disagree, you might have some completely different observations you want to throw in. So I really love to hear your feedback here today. And I want to start with SAP. So we were talking about SAP just a moment ago. SAP's S/4HANA is sort of their flagship product that they are that they've been promoting for several years now, close to a decade now. S/4HANA has been sort of the flagship SAP product. They have a large subset of their customer base, their legacy customer base, that are still using ECC or R3 that have not yet made the transition to S/4HANA. S/4HANA brings a whole new architecture and platform compared to legacy SAP systems. The HANA sort of real-time database platform that they've built HANA on, or S/4HANA on that HANA platform, has been sort of a real change in strategy for SAP. So part of it was to provide faster performance for their databases, and especially when you get into analytics, and now with AI, this can be a really big deal. But just getting fast access to data, and also HANA's or SAP's building of S/4HANA on the HANA platform also reduced or eliminated SAP's dependency on Oracle to provide Oracle databases, which in the past SAP had relied on Oracle technology as some of the underlying database technology. As you probably can imagine, SAP and Oracle are fierce competitors in the ERP space, but they were also supplier and customer, on the back end technology up until now. So with SAP HANA, with that platform, they've sort of mitigated that risk, if you will, or that dependency on Oracle for its database technology. So those are a couple things, or a couple advantages, I suppose you could say, that HANA brings to the table. Just like any past SAP products, though, S/4HANA is very complex. It's very broad. It's very robust. You can do a lot of stuff, which is great if you're a diversified multinational organization. But where it gets tricky is if you are a mid-sized organization, there's going to be cases where it might be too much for you. It's too much complexity, too much risk, too much cost. But if you're trying to scale for growth, you want to become that multi-billion-dollar multinational organization in the coming years, S/4HANA could be a great platform to help you get there. So I'd love to hear feedback from the audience here. If you've used SAP before, if you're in the SAP community, would love to hear your feedback here on what your thoughts are on S/4HANA. One thing I'll mention is we've seen some clients, and this is becoming less true over time, but it's still true to some degree. But we're seeing some clients that still struggle with some of the capabilities that they were accustomed to in ECC, the legacy SAP product that has not yet made it over to the S/4HANA platform. In other words, they haven't transitioned every single nook and cranny and feature and function of ECC has not yet made that migration over to S/4HANA, especially when you get into some more complex manufacturing processes or advanced planning, things of that nature. There just simply isn't that maturity and that established functionality that ECC had for decades, which is understandable. S/4HANA hasn't even been a full decade yet. They're coming up on a decade, but it hasn't been a full decade, whereas ECC had been around for multiple decades, a lot of R&D dollars, a lot of time to build those capabilities. So those are some things to consider. There's also the issue of SAP's mandate or its sunset date for legacy customers to move off of ECC. That's creating a lot of anxiety and fear and doubt in the SAP community. And it's also putting a strain on SAP consultants and implementation technology providers to where there's a spike in demand that is difficult for a lot of organizations to satisfy or to keep up with. So those are some of the things we've got to consider as well. Is it the right time for us to make that jump? And is our implementation plan realistic in that nature based on availability of resources and whatnot? So those are some of the strengths and weaknesses of SAP. Again, I started my career as a certified SAP consultant. For the first 3 years of my career, all I did was SAP stuff. And this is back, R3, which is the major platform before ECC back in the late 90s. So this is a long time ago, but I sort of grew up in the SAP space for better or for worse. And, I think actually my understanding of SAP has sort of shaped my opinion of the ERP space in general. But there's some different pros and cons to SAP and the S/4HANA product. So love to hear your feedback on it. S/4HANA, what do you think the future of S/4HANA is? Where do you see it fitting best in the industry? And while I'm waiting for you to answer that question here today, I want to get to another comment here from Ashish. Ashish on LinkedIn says, we also evaluate the interoperability, especially for integrations, API support, ecosystem partnerships, and install base across a wide range of hyperscalers for cloud implementations, having to follow the roadmap and maturity model. So great point. Back when I was talking about the platform, looking at your ERP system, not just as an application, but giving you a platform to do integration, to look at third-party application providers and maybe have built some sort of app or capability on that specific platform that gives you sort of the best of both worlds, really, if you think about it. And what you're alluding to here, Ashish, is that combination of the best of both worlds, which is getting an off-the-shelf system that's established and proven, but also having the flexibility of a platform that opens up additional providers and additional things that you can build yourself. If you do want to do a custom app and you want to do it on, an SAP platform or a NetSuite platform, whatever it is, knowing that you've got that platform and you've got the tools to be able to do that is extremely powerful. And that can provide a lot of flexibility, a lot of options for organizations going forward. The one thing I will say, though, is sometimes when you get into these platforms and these interoperability based solutions, sometimes they can get overwhelming. It opens up so many options that it provides almost too much flexibility, too many options. And a lot of organizations find that overwhelming, or they find that actually plays to their strengths, to their weaknesses as an organization. And just to give you an example, if you're an organization that's highly decentralized, you've grown a lot through acquisition, or you're a multinational, but you're very decentralized and you have independent ways of operating throughout the world, and you're trying to move to a model now to where you have more of a consistent operating model and you've got more standardized processes and operation models and things of that nature, actually having that interoperable, flexible solution can fuel the weakness that you're trying to move away from. And that's why a lot of times organizations in that mode will say, well, we want to go with an SAP S/4HANA because for better or for worse, it's a little bit less flexible and it gives us a certain amount of standardization and rigidity. And I don't mean rigidity in a bad way necessarily, but some organizations want that. They want their ERP system to bring the structure, the consistency, the rigidity, whatever you want to call it. And that's why they go that direction. Now, what you have to recognize is that has a different set of risks. If we go, for example, if we move away from a a real flexible, interoperable sort of solution. And let's use Microsoft Dynamics as an example here, and I'll come back to Dynamics 365 here in a second. But let's just talk about D365. D365 is a very flexible solution, and it's got a lot of good integration tools, a lot of the interoperability that Ashish is mentioning, a lot of flexibility if you want to custom code anything or change anything with the software, all stuff that you might consider as a strength. But if you're an organization that's already struggling with inconsistent operations and you have too many disparate ways of operating, implementing something like a Microsoft D365 might fit that culture, but it might actually prevent you from accomplishing what you're trying to accomplish, which is to become more standardized, if that is indeed what you're trying to do. So that's why some organizations will say, well, we don't want a Microsoft D365 because that just fuels some of that flexibility or that inconsistency that we're trying to move away from. Let's go with more of an S/4HANA model to where it's more structured, more standardized, gives us a little bit more consistency as an organization. So, that's one of those intangible strategic things you've got to consider. And you also have to recognize if you do go that latter route where you're that decentralized, inconsistent company that's trying to become more scalable, more standardized, that's great. S/4HANA might help you get there, but now you've got to recognize that that's going to introduce a bunch of culture shock to your organization, which is a whole nother set of risks that you've got to manage that has nothing to do with the technology, really. It has more to do with the organization and how you're going to navigate that. So that's just some of the ways you want to think through the whole evaluation process, not only to get to a decision on is SAP the right answer, or is it Microsoft, or is it some other solution. You also want to not only get to that answer of what the right technology is, but you also want to understand what's our implementation strategy and what's our overall rollout strategy based on what it is we're implementing. And if we're implementing S/4HANA, we might have to invest more in change management because it's probably going to be more of a culture shock and it's more of a change for us. And we have to spend more time reconciling broken business processes or inconsistent business processes. Not a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with that, but you just have to make sure you factor that into your overall plan and that you've budgeted for it and you've got a realistic time frame that reflects all that. So those are some of the considerations that get well beyond just choosing technology per se, but also choosing technology and choosing a rollout and a transformation strategy that's going to help you get there. Just some additional feedback here as it relates to S/4HANA before I move on to other software vendors. This is from Hillary on LinkedIn. Hillary says, I work for a Fortune 100 on ECC, which is an SAP product, a legacy SAP product. I work for a Fortune 100 on SAP ECC, and I agree the strategy to upgrade to S4 was very iterative, but the SAP treasury model I upgraded went very smoothly. So that's great to hear. That's good. It's always good to hear a good success story, especially when it involves a big product like SAP and when it involves a big Fortune 100 company. Anytime you say that you've been successful in that environment, I'd say, there's probably a lot of good stuff we can learn from that because so many large, complex organizations do struggle with their implementations, not just for SAP, but for any technology, given the complexity of the business. So that's great feedback. Let's see if I can show this entire comment here. I'll have to show part of it and read the rest of it to you, but this is from Ard on LinkedIn. Ard says, we do see customers using these big ERP platforms. Most of the time, these are the OEMs and indeed multi-everything companies. With ASML as an example, they do have a big impact on the supply chain, high-tech companies in the first tier and below. This has also an impact on the interoperability, overarching the digitalization of the supply chain instead of those individual companies. So thank you for your feedback there, Ard. This comment here, let me get to another point here from Carmen on LinkedIn. Hello, Carmen. Good to see you. I think she's in Chicago as well. Someone else was in Chicago that commented. I believe Carmen is based there as well. Carmen says, right on point, something to consider is how you're pushing out your content and housing your data when considering your platform. So really good point. And this is a great example of this the sorts of evaluation criteria you need to look at that fall outside the realm of your normal let's look at the features and functions of the software. But what Carmen's alluding to here is something even deeper in looking at, how is data structured and how are you going to get data from your legacy systems to your new ERP system. Those are all things that need to be carefully considered as well. So thank you for your feedback there, Carmen. Another comment from Ard is that no need to explain. I guess the SMBs in the lower tiers are a lot smaller with less resources. Risks risk to high for move to these bigger platforms, at least here in the Netherlands. So thank you for joining from the Netherlands. I'll actually be in the Netherlands. You're part of the world next week. So good to have you here in the meantime. Here's a comment from Hillary again on LinkedIn. Says, I'm implementing a client on Sage Intacct ERP, which is not highly customizable. In hindsight, Microsoft D365 would have been a better choice for their customized needs. So great point. You do want to look at your ability to customize if you need to, and Microsoft tends to provide a good tool set to customize, to integrate with other third-party systems and whatnot. I'm not saying Sage Intacct is bad at it, but Microsoft generally has more functionality, more features, more open architecture, more of a lot of things that a mid-size or even a larger organization might be looking for. Whereas Sage Intacct is generally more of a smaller ERP system that's for smaller organizations when you compare it to Microsoft D365. So that was the number 4 most popular podcast segment for 2024. And that was where I talk about the top ERP systems of 2025. If you want to see the full discussion there, I had a great live discussion there with a live audience. Go to episode 182 at transformationgroundcontrol.com. You can see that episode or listen to that full episode with a full discussion there if you like that topic. So what have we got here for number 3, Darian?
Yeah, top 3 now. So this one you guys might recognize from our last episode all about our top AI discussions, but it turns out to also be one of our top discussions of the year. This was a discussion with Lauren Ryder on episode 167, and the topic was artificial intelligence's impact on business operations and its people. This was a great episode, so here is the clip. Let's roll it.
Whether you put it, maybe we need to look at our values and actually, refresh those. But we are a company that looks to innovate, that looks to do things better, do efficiently, effectively, what have you. So that culture has to be through the entire organization. We can't just have a pocket, because what we know is data doesn't just touch one team. Like if we've got, a sales team making sales data, we've got a marketing team feeding things in there, and on the other side we've got operations, and we've got all sorts of other pieces that in the finance team. Everyone talks to one another, so business units don't operate in isolation. So you can't just have one team that's really innovative. And I think infiltrating that culture means that the CEO has to be on board with this, and they have to drive it. And again, can be a bit of a challenge. They can say, yes, I want it, here's some money, but if they're not demonstrating and talking about it with their business, they're not going to get that kind of leverage.
Right. Yeah, that's super interesting. So cultural, allowing your culture to shift and to embrace the technology and be open to it is one. Amin, I'll just pop the comment up again just for the audience here, but Amin mentioned how the leader that was afraid of AI because it'll make people more productive and then they'll just have more coffee breaks. I'd be curious to hear beyond, in addition to what Amin said here, what do you see as some of the biggest obstacles? This question's for the audience. What do you see as the biggest obstacles to AI adoption within businesses and enterprises throughout the world? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. If you're part of an organization, I'd love to hear, whether or not your organization is embracing it. If you're a consultant, I'd love to hear how you see your clients embracing or resisting it. That's be good feedback to hear from you here. And this is from ZIC on YouTube. ZIC says, what about the risks of making smarter employees by using AI at the price of making more stupid organizations? If we do it the same way our competitors do, we will be just a flat copy of the others. So
I have spent many hours contemplating this and what the future of organizations look like. And to me, it's actually a little bit scary because, if I give some examples, so I have a friend who he runs a company here in Australia. It's like a swimsuit business. And he has an AI tool that they basically put in, this is what we're selling, this is the audience, upload some photos, and basically you hit go and it creates an entire marketing plan for this particular product, right? Now, when I spoke to him, that was probably about 6-8 months ago. So that was it. Now I'm seeing we've got AI that will actually take, you've got the photos, it'll actually write and it does includes your copy for your socials, but it can actually post your socials. It can measure your ROI. If you're not making enough money, it'll do your A/B testing. Basically, we've outsourced the entire marketing function, right? And you're absolutely right, Zach, that if we are all using the same tools, every single company will be marketing the same way. And so we have to then go back and think, okay, well, if we're automating those things, what are the things that we really should be using our human brains for? Yeah. And that's when we do have to make smarter organizations. And that's when our skill sets should start to change. And we need to train on higher level cognitive and social emotional skills on, how to make better decisions. A really important skill, how to, be more creative and work better and collaboratively, and to understand your customers at a deep empathetic level so that you can approach things differently than your competitor. So, those questions, those are the ones that keep me up at night. So,
yeah. Well, as you were describing that, Lauren, I couldn't help but think of, I was thinking to myself, what was the last major technological shift that might have been somewhat comparable to this? And I feel like AI in my lifetime, at least in my opinion, AI has been the most significant technological shift. I don't remember anything quite this tectonic in the industry.
Well,
but
I think maybe when we moved to the cloud, when everything was suddenly cloud-based, because, you'd remember everything, we had all of our systems on site and now they're in the cloud. And the changes that a business would have to face is, suddenly, again, we're other than, a little bit of change, we basically have to use the same program as everyone else, right? Because we're at the whim, with the mercy of, and suddenly we think we've lost, our competitiveness. But look, organizations have adjusted and adopted, and it's not like that, even though we are all in the cloud. And so I think people are smart enough to be able to shift and adapt.
Yeah. Well, and you think about in the 90s when the internet was first, even before a cloud, the precursor to the cloud obviously was the internet. And you think about the big changes that the internet entailed. That entailed a certain amount of automation that came with the internet, a certain amount of open access to knowledge and sharing. And we suddenly, as a human race, over the last 25, 30 years, have become exponentially smarter in a faster, shorter period than, decades or centuries before us. So you'd think, well, maybe the internet was similar in that, that you could have said the same thing about the internet. It's going to make us all equal. It's going to make businesses equal because now all of a sudden we're all accessing the same information, the same data. But that's not the case. I mean, there's still winners and losers and some that outperform others. So I've got to think the same is going to be true with AI. It's going to be, in the short term, I think it's going to be people that embrace AI and figure out how to use it to their advantage in the short term. Longer term, as your competition catches up, of course, then you've got to keep innovating and figuring out new ways. But I think you're right. I think the human component can't go away. I don't see how it could. I think it's just going to, like you keep saying, it's going to change your job and change the skills that you need in this post-AI world that we're in right now.
Well, that's right. I mean, I've got teenage kids. I tell my 17-year-old daughter, I said, the job that, that you're going to have doesn't exist today.
Yeah.
So things are changing. And I do think it's really just flows down to human nature. As you said, the internet, we adapted. The cloud, we adapted. And people just want to win. People want to do better. They want to improve themselves, right? And so we will find ways around it. That's just human nature.
Yeah. Yeah, here's another question on YouTube from Amin. Thank you for all the questions, Amin. And after all these questions, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. So, because if I'm saying it wrong, I've said it wrong many times. But the question here is a BCG, Boston Consulting Group study showed that learned language models make individuals more productive. But when it came to a group, it makes it the opposite. So it's making groups less productive. Have you seen anything along those lines, Lauren, or is that?
I haven't seen that study. What I can say is, when I do sort of introduce and talk about this, I say, these LLMs and the Gen AI, the tools that we use are great for personal productivity. And so, and that's exactly what I call them. They're personal productivity tools. And what I talk about is enterprise AI. And so to me, I see it actually, they're different. It's a different conversation. So yeah, I can see how that study would give you that information. I mean, when it says when it comes to a group, I don't know if they're saying they're using the same kind of tool together, or whether it's something like, as I mentioned, a great, that customer service example where they start learning through what the customers and the employees are putting in and they learn what to do. And yeah, that would make people less intelligent because you get fed the information. So if you're sitting at a customer service desk and, the language model has learned for you, of course you don't need to be creative because, somebody calls in for a password reset and, it's heard it, it knows it, the password reset's already in the person's inbox without you having to do anything. Absolutely, you're not going to be doing any more work than you have to. So if that's what that study is referring to, I get it.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I'm going to keep rolling with these questions here because they're really good ones here. This is from YouTube as well. How do you answer an employee that is reticent to AI who tells that being more productive is to make ourselves work more? So in other words, do you think employees might resist AI because we're just going to ask them to do something different, automate part of their job and take on more responsibility?
Look, resistance comes in all forms. So as we know, when we're rolling out change, some people are going to be early adopters, some people are going to sit on the fence and wait, and some people are going to dig in. And, and there's active resistance and there's passive resistance. And it sounds like this person is actually quite actively resistant. And I would say that those are actually the easiest people to deal with in an organization because you know exactly what their problem is. So you start using some really great questioning techniques. I don't know, like 5 why. Why do you think that? Why? Get them down to the real essence of why they're actually saying this. Because what they're saying is be more productive, make ourselves work more. Why do they think that? Because this could be something that is some sort of unconscious bias they've had since they were a child about, the nature of work. Well, that's cool. We can work around that. Right. But, if we can address the why they actually feel that way, that's actually easy. And then, as I said, the next big step is to demonstrate, actually show them, because at some point they're going to go, I still don't like it. Okay. You know what? Let's get this one out. Let's pilot it or just show it. Just do the first one, shall we say. Next, we've got it. We've got you on board. How cool is that?
Yeah. Very, very true. And I agree with the active resistance in some ways is easier to deal with because it's so obvious. It's on the surface. It's not hidden. There's no passive aggressive nature to it. Typically it's something you could tackle head on. This is just more of a comment from William on YouTube. He says clients will resist AI the same way they resist everything else. So he's not the glass half full kind of guy when it comes to AI. It sounds like he's glass empty perhaps when it comes to people's acceptance of AI. But you could be right. We'll find out over time. I remember when when I was a kid, my parents worked at Digital Equipment Corporation, and they were, which no longer exists, but at the time it was a fairly big computer manufacturer. And I remember when robotics were first coming around in the 80s and it was becoming kind of a big deal for manufacturing. And they were introducing robotics on the manufacturing floor of Digital Equipment. And I remember the fear that I heard from my parents, but I also heard it from others. Even as a kid, I remember everyone was sort of afraid that the robots were going to take all the manufacturing jobs. And even today you look and you're like, that hasn't really happened. There's a ton of robotics now on manufacturing shop floors, but it's totally changed what it means to be a manufacturing shop floor clerk or a warehouse clerk. Your job's different. You're not, it may have eliminated some over time through attrition, like you mentioned, but I feel like it's just changed it and people have had to adapt to it. And for the most part, I think they have.
And I've had a really great example recently. I met with this guy. They're one of the biggest farmers in Australia, but they're particularly the biggest tomato farmer, or tomato for our American viewers. And so they've actually built robotics through their entire a greenhouse, call it greenhouses. I say it's huge. And so they've got these robots running back and forth and they're fertilizing. Initially, they're going to be picking, they're going to be doing all sorts of farm work. And so I said to him, obviously my first question is, okay, so what about your workforce, right? Because right now they have people walking around fertilizing tomato plants. And so what do we do? So it turns out, for something like farming, they, I don't know if anyone across the world knows this. If you do want to come to Australia, we have visas where you can actually come and pick fruit and vegetables at farms. And so it's pretty cool. And so he said, basically, we don't have to necessarily run that program anymore because we don't need people to come and to pick and to fertilize. However, he said, the staff that we have, what we're doing is we're upskilling them. and we're training them how to manage the robots, and they're really just putting them through education programs. So they're saving the money of not hiring the people on an annual basis, but then they're also giving upskill and giving people, new jobs for the future, which, because you can take that to any other farm after that.
Yeah. Very interesting. Yeah. Rolling with the changes for sure.
All right. So that was a clip from Lauren Ryder's and Eric's discussion. Again, that was from episode 167, how to transformationgroundcontrol.com if you want to listen or watch the full podcast. We are in our top 2 now, so I'm going to hand it over to Eric.
Yeah, this is an exciting one. And this is one of the legends or the godfathers, pioneers of the ERP software industry. And the topic was ERP software and how the future looks much different than the past. And this is a really cool conversation with Jan Baan, who's the founder of Baan Software, which is an ERP provider. It was one of the early ERP vendors in the late 70s, I think it was when they first started. And he has since had a couple other companies since selling Baan to Infor. Infor owns Baan right now. But since leaving Baan and leaving Infor, he has started a couple other software and tech related companies. And just a really interesting guy who's seen it all, in the industry. So this conversation, not surprisingly, does really well because he's so well known in the industry. And this is from episode 162, where I interviewed Jan Baan to talk about the future of ERP versus the past. So let's roll that clip.
With new technology, we can be all different, but we all coming the same, like Fleming in SAP and use the same functionality. And there's no differentiator. Now, we should destroy this. And we should say, take only a generic part. Like in a car, some things are generic, but your dashboard is specific. And it is a decouple point and bring it there.
That's very interesting. So here's a question that sort of builds on something you just mentioned a moment ago, Jan. You were talking about how being a visionary is bullshit and it's all about your experience and lessons from it. But maybe just building on that point a little bit, this is from Jan on LinkedIn. Jan asks, apart from experience, how do you predict well ahead? What are your sources? So maybe another way to frame that is, are there sort of like academic or just data sources you use in addition to your experience and your thought?
It's simple. Just be down to earth. Just do it fast and do it again and throw it away and again pick it up. Because you cannot oversee it. And the problem is what people are doing, they all build it and all these elements are in, but go there. First, you have a feeling. Should you go north or south? You have to go north. But if you climb the mountain, you cannot see it. You have to build a camp again. And if you go left or the right, you correct. You have camps, you do something between. Now, what we did was extremely important, that also in our software factory, that we were able to give, let me say, you have the freedom to people. We were saying, I'm dealing with intelligent people. And that's already a problem because they're not so easy to handle. Now, we learned, it's attitude of people. We learned how to make these people more innovative. That's one point. But then you have another point. If you have innovative people, they're sometimes introvert, or sometimes maybe you need a little autistical to understand it. With these kinds of people, you have to cross another border, which is not easy. You have to make them also more that they take initiatives. That's the biggest problem. And then people are afraid. They say, I have to ask my mother to do this. Say, you have not to ask your mother. You have not to ask your boss. You just do it. No. And what I did, I went to all the three people, say, it is better to ask for forgiveness than for permission. You just do it. No. That means I've given all the guys, all the authority in the small teams. And that was, and then the third element is an important. Is it me? I know it should be integrity. And it means it should be not done for me, for the team. And then you have to also reward the team and share wealth with them, that they feel it's all for us. And then 1 and 1 is never 3. You Americans are always saying 1 and 1 is 3. I like to have 2 and you can have 1. And then your problem. Now, 1 and 1, in my opinion, is 11. And bring it in. And I was only done, the core element is only the attitude. Give totally freedom to your people. Let them go. Don't ask, and then and every moment they share it, and it's coming, because in the beginning you cannot oversee it. It's nonsense. Everything you like to do in a vision is all nonsense because it's never reality.
Right.
But you learn so much for your customer. That means important is then the customer intimacy part. And even try to have the decoupling generic part and the specific, and then you learn again.
Right.
In my opinion, it's more the attitude than knowledge.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree. You can always find smart people. You can always learn more. That's great, but it doesn't do you any good if you don't have the right attitude and the humble, the humility to learn from mistakes and that sort of thing. So those are great points. So just shifting gears a little bit, and I think you might have alluded to this answer or to this question already, but what are some of the ERP software and just general enterprise tech trends that you're most excited about right now based on where we are in the industry here in 2024?
What we see important is still ERP. I call it often the mother of all complexity. It became extremely complicated. And what is the limitation of ERP? It's done in one database, a relational database with tens of thousands of tables. Sometimes SAP is maybe coming to 100,000 tables or so. It's becoming complicated. And then you increase it. Now, then we moved to end-to-end processes, and then you do it on the process layer. Now, what we now do is realize that in Kubernetes, in this containerization, you can build very small parts and unite them together. And it is done, and you can do it 100 times faster and better to do this type of stuff. But most people cannot oversee ERP. That's the problem. If you have the kids from Google, have no clue what ERP means. Now, therefore, you have ERP is a given. Okay, use it like the engine. If you see a new car, the engine is good enough. Therefore, today's ERP is good enough for another 10 years if you decouple it. But only take it vanilla, take the bespoke out, and first start with the bespoke in microservice on the front end. Decouple that. When it is vanilla, you can implement it in 1 week for a new version. Now, you see now the Inforce, etc., try to come like a Salesforce, every 3 months with a new version, like a kind of evergreen. Okay, when you decouple the bespoke, you adopt it again, and then it's good enough, and then sunset it step by step. And then you bring those processes, you have the most value downstream for the knowledge worker. Do this. You make more money to optimize the downstream workflow than to increase the backend. The backend is good enough.
Right.
But the backend never could do UX. The ideal situation is by ERP that you have no user, one user. There is no UX needed in ERP. The UX part can be, what we say, late binding, can be done in the microservice 100 times better.
Right.
The middleware fits not. Now I learned that, and then okay, it's not so attractive. Now, if you go there, then you can be maybe you could have an element. What we see, two elements: is ServiceNow on the one hand, complicated stuff, and SAP on the one hand. Now maybe you can do it for 10% of the course with Infor and what we're doing together in this stuff. It's good enough. For a Boeing was already good enough. I mean, the functionality of the core master production scheduling is still the same. All those complex, all the source code is still the same. A product configurator is still the same. Now, but from the downstream element, let's say from the decouple point, when it is from a decoupled point going from generic to specific, then the whole project model, project control can be built in microservices. Now, I did it already for a tremendous big automotive company with 22,000 users. We built, as a Microsoft killer, we built in a couple of months a totally project module, and it's much simpler, where you bring everything, the invoice there, and then you offload it. They deal with 40,000 SAP users. Now, and then you decouple the project module and bring it more downstream. Now, this is the way of thinking, respect it, and then step by step sunset and decouple it.
Right. So I want to come back to that point in just a moment, but I also want to pull up a question that's a very good one that I think is perfect for you, Jan. This is from Kyler on LinkedIn. She says, Eric and Jan, is traditional ERP dying? What are your thoughts?
What is dying is refreshing. Let's first say, but ERP, because realize ERP is built in the first IT wave, is the wave of databases. Now, but ERP should belong to big data. Now, what I'm now doing, I'm not dying ERP, I'm optimizing a little. The old man I give them a car or so. That means immediately I take the database of ERP, immediately in BigQuery of Google. Now, that means, and then I can, but I have to go, but if you take a process out of ERP, most people do not understand it, you should be the finishing element back. Now, what we learned in BPM, if you take some things out of ERP, the result for the compliance part should be back. Now, there are principles, and then ERP can go another 10 years, but never do a big bang. Never. And then it brings also the complexity. But I can't. We have the Dutch government. They spend $1 billion to replace an SAP system now. And if you see all these big companies, they pay hundreds of millions. Now that is nonsense. It could be done for 10 times cheaper if you look to it. If you do it smart.
Yeah. It's interesting. So is what you're advocating then, or suggesting, is that ERP, we need to rethink what ERP is. So ERP, in other words, is a back office database transaction
administrative, kind of an administrative system.
Okay. So we're trying,
but it's complicated. If you go to the generic part, the biggest part we built was, say, master scheduling, but not so many people are using this. But all to have to understand all those elements, decoupling elements, it's good enough. Because ERP, the data, the latency of ERP, the data, if you have it once a day, it's good enough, but you should pick it as one version of the truth. And that's what people cannot do this. That means if you adopt the work from the front end, you should adopt maybe once a day or once a week an ERP run, a master scheduling. That's good enough. It makes no sense to have an ERP run every 5 minutes. Now, you should have, but on the end, we take our IoT sensors, and they are real time, and I take it in a microsecond. Now, and I do that in the workflow. That can be, if you do this in ERP, it's 1,000 times too complicated. That means in late binding, you never have to do this type of workflow elements. And let me say this way, ERP is only handling a transactional element. But downstream, you have the human, and the human is not involved in ERP. Now, then downstream, you can take in these state machines and do it. Now, do it downstream, then you take the human and you combine this one. It means if the flow, see it as a car, the engine is below, but you travel there more with anywhere, with Google, where to go there, and it's on your dashboard. And there you need it every second.
Right. So can you help us understand then, and this is something that you and I talked about prior to this interview, but the difference between microservices and composable systems? You pointed out that there's a distinction there. How would you summarize that distinction?
Some people say ERP is composing, can never be composing, because there's no human involved. ERP is only a transaction. And if you have no big data, you have even no version release control. You have only the data from yesterday, but not from half a year ago. In big data, you see all the other elements. And you never can make it composing. But you do it composing, you adapt it as the engine, and you do it on your dashboard in the microservices. But then you need dynamic, semantical microservices, and then with Kubernetes, and then the big data is involved. Everything is Google providing me now. What I spent hundreds of millions in the last century, in the early days, to do it myself. Now you have to understand it. But it's all consumerized. The REST API is so much consumerized, or everything is here. It's so simple to do here. This consumerized. And this composing. And composing is not need in enterprise. Composing is always need by the job to be done.
Right.
See, if you do it too early, then you mislead people. Why should you compose when you work with 50 people in a factory, in a department? No, it means only when you sell or assemble the product. Now, composing is human.
Right.
And in that human composing element is downstream, is workflow. And some people, they misunderstand the power of microservices. They are strong. The tools in microservices are by 100 times stronger than the tools I built in ERP in the 90s. I mean, I can easily build a complete ERP system in a year time. But why should I do it? I can make much more money to let ERP stay in the back end because it's not so improving there so much, and edit it to the front end. ERP is good enough where it is today. It's people understand the processes. Yeah, they're not changing it. But over time, when we go to, say, 3D printing, but that failed, then you need no ERP. You need only PDM. But maybe over time, and what we did, we learned ERP and PDM. Maybe PDM is becoming more important than ERP to link the design. But you need, in the microservice, I have to bring everything together.
Right. Yeah, that's super interesting. And that's something I think is hard to understand in our space, because the software vendors love buzzwords, and so do the industry analysts. And so they'll use words like composable, microservices, and I hear those used somewhat interchangeably at times. And I think that's it helps to understand that difference.
And Erik, you know even more than I know that only a few people understand ERP. Even for a CIO, it's hard to understand the processes of ERP. There are sometimes more CPO is a Chief Procurement Officer than Chief Innovation Officer, and that is more the problem. And over time, IT will disappear and will be part of the business.
Yeah.
And what I'm doing now, I'm dealing with the business owner and with the business analyst. Immediately, I can generate already 70 or 80% source code in Java. That's what we do in our rapid tools. That means aligning IT and business is the core element.
Right.
Maybe the business engineer only understands the spreadsheet, but they can use the rules already in the spreadsheet. That means, and if I can, not with the program, but with the tools, adopt these rules already, then even I have not come over 6 months back. No, the business owner engineers is already responsible for the rules. And other times, IT did not understand. Coming back, there were the problems in the past.
Right.
You have to. The only element what you have to do is to simplify.
Yeah. Yeah. And it seems like too, a lot of organizations are stuck in the patterns of the past. So in other words, I have an old ERP system, so therefore I need to replace my ERP system. That's the mentality you hear. Back to your point about Chief Procurement Officer, I think
that's nice. Ellen from Gaston, they say, will Baan be eventually phased out and merged into Infor? I can call it again Baan. My name is Baan. And maybe even we can merge together. I'm still Baan, and I have the right to say Baan, but could be maybe a good suggestion. But okay, a little joking.
Yeah. Right. That's a great point and question. I was going to show that, and I'm having trouble. There it is. Thank you, Gaston. Great question there. I have another question that's sort of building on what you just were saying, Jan. I'm going to go find it here in a moment. And this is from Cyprian. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. On LinkedIn, says, what are the key differences between today's ERP and those from both your era, the 1990s? And I know you've already talked about microservices and cloud.
The difference between the ERP is nothing. And when ERP is going to the cloud, it's pseudo cloud. Realize that the same source code, and even as a problem, even today, most vendors have less functionality in the cloud than on premise. And the core and 80%, 70% of the core elements are built in the 90s and the 80s, and are still the same. Because the people today do not understand this source code to do this one therein. That's the biggest problem. And therefore we have to deal with it. But the good stuff is you see the input and the output, and with big data, if you take the data with big data, if you adopt, there are some things like the containerization, and if you bring AI on it, then you bring end to end from ERP to the knowledge worker, what it makes sense. Today, ChatGPT, etc., like Microsoft, they have 10 petabytes of data, but only unstructured, and they have no clue what ERP means. All the ERP data is hidden for ChatGPT. Therefore, they have no meaning. And we overvalue too much AI on this moment as only a suggestion for maybe a lawyer or so or some things, but not for an engineer on this moment. We have to be serious, and there's some things to do.
Well, I appreciate the fact that you mentioned something I always say, but I get a lot of criticism for, which is the functionality of cloud ERP systems is not as strong and doesn't have the same functionality as some of the on-premise legacy systems. I say that, and software vendors don't like when I say it. I'm not selling software, so I can just say what I think.
But Erik, that's due then from the ERP part, because the ERP part is done with the architectural view, because they're locked in from the 90s. But if I'm looking where I'm building application in Google, they are by far stronger to build every type of application. But the knowledge to do this is most times not available there. That means the best people of Google are smarter in gaming and all these other elements.
Right.
But if you use the same tools, you can make a 5 times stronger ERP. But ERP is good enough if you bring it to the end-to-end process, to the workflow. I should say, guys, you all can make a fortune of money and the best tremendous element for manufacturing companies if we connect the chain. And if we simplify the ERP part, take the customization out, and then even connect other stuff like BPM. Do nothing with IoT. Do it on the latest moment. If you talk machine to machine, the operator need a tool in the workflow and not an ERP. Now, if you make then a mistake, all these people are building in BAPIs. BAPIs, what is this? Now, that you have to be very old and people to do this. Now, it is nonsense to do this. Right. You should go take then Java and take then elements in a front end stuff. But when it is done, always every product, even in a Tesla car, you have 3 technology waves. You have still material, you have electronical, you have software. Now, there's nothing wrong with ERP. It's maybe the old, is maybe the engineering stuff. But if you see it as different technology waves in one solution and decouple them.
So that was a great conversation. That was the number 2 most popular podcast interview segment from 2024 on this podcast. If you like that, you want to hear more from Jan, who's a very smart guy, go to episode 162 of Transformation Ground Control by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com, and you can see that entire discussion with him. In fact, I also have another interview, I think from last year, that we did with him. You can search Jan Baan. If you just search Jan Baan Transformation Ground Control, you'll find the other episode. I apologize, I don't know which one it was, but it's from sometime in 2023. But this most recent one, episode 162, is a great one. Highly encourage you to check that out. So without further ado, actually, there is going to be further ado because we're going to take a quick break, but we have one left to do, and that is the most popular interview of 2024 on this podcast. So we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll share with you that number 1 segment and see if you can guess what you think the topic's about. So we'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control. My name is Eric Kimberling, and I'm the CEO and founder of Third Stage Consulting. Before we dive too far into today's content, I want to invite you to learn a little bit more about Third Stage Consulting, who we are and what we do. I've included a link to a video right here that describes Third Stage in a bit more detail. It talks about our story, our history, our philosophy, our clients, our service offerings, and that sort of thing. But in general, what Third Stage Consulting does is we're an independent and tech-agnostic consulting provider. We help clients through their entire digital transformation life cycles, beginning with digital strategy, software evaluation and selection, all the way through and including implementation planning, implementation readiness, and the actual implementation itself. We're technology agnostic, so we only represent our clients' best interests. We do not represent software vendors. But having said that, we work very closely with software vendors, all the leading players that you can imagine we've worked with, both in helping clients evaluate and select them, but also in helping clients implement those solutions as well. So we have a very broad, objective, agnostic view of the market that is meant to really represent your interest as you go through your digital transformation. I also encourage you to scan this QR code right here to get access to our resource center. This resource center has a ton of information, a ton of ebooks that are free. You have access to top 10 software rankings, playbooks for how to make your project more successful, guides to change management, YouTube videos, all kinds of stuff that are going to help you through your digital transformation. So I encourage you to scan this QR code to get access to those resources. And please feel free to reach out to me directly to brainstorm ideas about your project. Even if it's just informally, you want to bounce around some ideas and get some informal advice, I'd be happy to spend some time with you. So feel free to reach out to me. I've included my contact information below. You can also find it in the description field of this video as well.
The last thing you want to have happen is for your digital transformation to end up in court. I've been doing this for 20 years and I have seen everything. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney focusing my practice on drafting and negotiating software-related contracts and litigating software disputes across the country. Feel free to reach out to us at taftlaw.com. We'd love to talk to you about the litigation process and what you can expect.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 200. We're counting down the top 10 interviews of this podcast for the year, for 2024. These are the most popular interviews as determined by you, the listeners, and the people that watch this, these interview segments that got the most interaction, engagement, the most views, likes, all that good stuff. We base that top 10 on. And so we are up to number 1, which I don't want to give it away. Darian, I'll let you announce it, but it's a topic that I think a lot of people might guess it's based on this topic loosely, but tell us what it is.
Yeah, so the topic is how AI is reshaping the ERP software industry. Big shocker here. Our top interview is about AI. Not really surprising. It is something we have been covering a lot lately, and I'm sure we'll be covering a lot going into 2025. This was a great discussion, though. This was actually a vendor panel, so you get a lot of different perspectives in this discussion, which is always a good thing. If you want to listen to the full interview or discussion, you can head over to episode 168 on transformationgroundcontrol.com, and you will be able to listen to that full episode there. So let's play this clip.
To get started, I'm gonna start with Karen from Priority Software. I'm going to ask you this question to start, Karen. And what would you say have been the practical implications of incorporating artificial intelligence into ERP solutions?
Thank you, Eric. Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here today. Just to introduce myself before I'm answering the question. I'm Karen Scherer-Teiber, the VP Product Management at Priority Software. I'm in the ERP and business application industry for the last 26 years, which is more or less since I was born, doing different positions, both on the professional and on the business side. And in the last 10 years, I'm leading the Priority product group at Priority Software. Priority is a veteran technology leader in that arena. We have tens of thousands of organizations that using our cloud, open, agile business application platforms in more than 20 industries, 30 countries. And I'm really proud to be here today and to share our experience with incorporating AI and maybe other emerging technologies into our solutions. So for your question, Eric, I think that AI and ERP or any other business application is something that is actually all over the place. It's not a hype anymore, as you just mentioned. It's a real thing. A lot of organizations are already deployed AI capabilities. And we can talk, and I'm sure we will talk in this session about productivity, about cost reduction, about predicted analytics, about planning and forecasting. But I want to choose something that is quite different, and this is the experience, the user experience. And I'm choosing that one because user experience was since ever one of the challenges of business application. How can you take all that comprehensive, rich, complex functionality and just make it intuitive to the person who needs to use it? How can you make similar experience like the private application you used to have in his device? And it's almost impossible but when it comes to AI, it's becoming very simple because today users have different set of expectation from the ERP system. They are not required and they are not interested to do all that bulk, repetitive, massive transaction recording as they used to do. And here come the automation, but it's not just a simple automation. Of course, also automation all the ways through process automation and RPA that we can record to the system and teach the system what process it can do for us. We can have the system autofill some data for us. We can make the system just activate the third-party application for us by webhooks. We can do many things by automation, but when it comes to AI, it's not only the automation, it's also the fact that those modules can actually learn and train themselves to fix the mistakes they already did. And maybe some mistakes that if a human being have done those transactions, he will also have. So we reduce the errors of the human being and we actually have an extreme innovative digital experience for the user itself. And it's not end on that place because AI also can think faster and take into consideration a lot of data that a human being maybe can do, but it will take a lot of time and not will be in a real time. So when you are getting insight from the system and you can do whatever you can do whenever you're looking at transactions such as upselling the point of sale or whatever, then you really improve everything in your organization processes. So that's part of the experience. I can talk a lot also about personalization and the fact that the system can just learn and monitor the user behavior and make sure that the workspace, the UI workspace of the ERP is exactly what he needs, and he is not enjoying or suffering from all that rich and busy forms of an ERP system.
Yeah. No, that's great. And Carrie from Epicor, what are your thoughts on that too? What are some of the implications of incorporating AI into ERP softwares, and how do you guys view that at Epicor?
Yeah, happy to talk about that. And thank you so much for putting on this event, because I think it's really important to get the message across that ERP should be at the core of your AI strategy. So Carrie Jordan, I'm the Group Vice President of Product Management at Epicor. Epicor is $1 billion. Actually, we just surpassed our $1 billion mark. There is a press release that went out this week, so we're really excited about that. Our CFO is actually at the New York Stock Exchange talking about it right now.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. So we're a global provider of ERP solutions for what we call the make, move, sell economy. Those are manufacturers, distributors, building supply, retail, and automotive aftermarket. And when it comes to incorporating AI into ERP, the reason I say it should be core to the AI strategy is because that's where all of that critical business data is. And it should be, because it's in the ERP, already structured. So there's a sophisticated data ontology that allows you to apply AI in a way that reduces hallucinations, that provides accurate responses, so you can use it in business, consequential business decisions. So very, very important. We've already seen many ways in which AI has already been incorporated for years with ERP technology, such as MRP. It's an expert learning system. It learns from past production runs. And as advanced material requirements planning goes, it allows you then to run those production runs much faster because it's learning over time. AP automation, another great example, incorporating optical resolution scanning, right? So that it can incorporate that information, feed it into ERP, automating these systems. But with generative AI, this is where it gets exciting. This is where we can really start to push the bounds and create new customer value we've never seen before. An example, really easy one, would be incorporating generative AI into a learning assistant. So you could apply the generative AI to your learning library. This is something that Epicor is doing. And you could just ask very simple questions, especially if you're a new user of the ERP, right? You could say, how do I create a part? How do I do an order entry? And it will respond in very natural language ways. So just, again, beginning to scratch the surface at so many really exciting ways we can incorporate ERP or AI into ERP, which are the screens that your users are comfortable and already familiar with every day.
It's the back office transactional data that feeds into AI as well, which makes the AI models learn better and work better in that regard too.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Before I turn it, I'm going to turn it to Ranga from Oracle NetSuite here in just a second. But before I do, just real quickly, I'd be curious to hear from the audience. I know we've got a lot of people on the LinkedIn Live right now, on the YouTube Live, Facebook, Twitter, X as well. Love to hear from you guys. What are you seeing in the AI world, or what are you most interested in the world of AI and ERP? And love to hear that in the chat here. And also, speaking of the chat too, if you don't mind, if you have any questions along the way, just drop those in the chat. We're going to get to some of those questions, and we'll kind of open it up for discussion as we go here. And also be interested to hear where everyone's joining from today too. I know I'm asking a lot of questions here of the audience, but just drop in the chat what city and country you're joining from, if you don't mind. And we'd love to hear from you there. So Ranga from Oracle NetSuite, what are your thoughts on this whole topic?
Yeah, thanks, Eric, and thanks for it's great to be on this panel with a great set of rivals, as you put it. Ranga Bodla, I run field engagement and marketing for Oracle NetSuite, actually a 14-year veteran of NetSuite. So about 7 years prior to the acquisition by Oracle, and then 7 years after that. If you're not familiar with NetSuite, our big thing has always been we were the first really provider to market in 1998. And 25 years later, we're still operating as really the leading cloud ERP provider with over 37,000 customers around the world, every size, industry, you name it, we're out there. Carrie, I really appreciated your comments about incorporating AI into the ERP, and I couldn't agree more. And it's really, I think, one of the biggest things that we think about as well. I mean, really, you think about the thing that feeds AI is you got to have good data. If you have crappy data, you're going to have crappy AI. And so, the best AI is going to come from the best data, and the best data is going to come from, a comprehensive ERP system that is leveraging that. The other piece that I think is really important, and Carrie talked a little bit about this, but I want to build on that, is we know that with ERP, the best thing is going to come is when more users are using it and you have that adoption. If it's a benefit to them as opposed to a hindrance, if they're using it in their everyday job. And that's really where I see AI really driving adoption of these systems. If people are using it, it's making their job better. It's enabling them to be happier, more productive. That's really where I see the practical implications. And that's why our strategy when we think about AI is everywhere. It's not an add-on. It's not it's not this bolt-on that you put onto the ERP system. It really has to be embedded into all the business processes that ERP can help support. And that's really where we think about it, and really where we're trying to drive. Whether you're talking about supply chain, whether you're talking about HR, whether it's these value streams about how you acquire and grow customers, or how you drive order to cash, and making sure the AI is incorporated in all of those elements. And that's a real big part of our roadmap and where we're going, and what we've already put in place, but then also where we see going. And to me, an ERP without AI is like a car without wheels, and that's really where we see this driving towards. And excited for the rest of the conversation.
Yeah, that's great sound feedback. How about you, Christian, from TEC? And by the way, speaking of TEC, this QR code right here, right to the left of me, is where you can scan to learn more about this event coming up, the ESS event in Orlando. But Christian, what are your thoughts on this whole topic here?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, Technology Evaluation Centers, we are an impartial advisory firm when it comes to enterprise software selection. So some of the views and points that we have isn't necessarily in regards to the software, but we have to consider from an organizational standpoint, what exactly are these practical implications? And just to build on what Raj was saying, is that data is key. If organizations have a data-centric approach, they're looking at the information, AI is only going to allow you to move that along and to increase your productivity and provide more intelligence and make it more actionable quicker. I'm sorry, it was Ranga that said that, not Raj.
That's okay.
Yeah, so just to sum it up, as Carrie as well mentioned, the ERP is the foundation of that. So with regards to implementing or considering an AI strategy, without the core ERP properly set up, without proper data, garbage in, garbage out, none of that will make sense. We already are on that path. It's not a new topic. Hyperautomation, business process has been around for ages, and even RPA. Once you've had all those steps, then I think AI is the next step. And in order to remain competitive, you got to consider it.
Right. Yeah, very much so. Yeah, this is really interesting, just seeing how the two technologies are coming together, the world of ERP, and how essential that is to leveraging AI the way its potential can enable. So that was the number one most popular podcast interview for 2024 from this particular podcast, from Transformation Ground Control. Great to see a group of vendor panelists on a panel like that to talk about their views of AI and how they're all tackling AI. So it's rare that you get to see all these competing software vendors in the same room. So that was a great conversation. If you want to watch that full discussion, which is a really fascinating discussion, a lot of really good audience questions we received live when we did that interview, you can go to episode number 168. So go to transformationgroundcontrol.com, look for episode 168, and you will find that full interview there if you'd like to listen to the full hour-long discussion. So, and by the way, if you are interested in AI as well, check out episode 199, which was last week's episode. Episode 199, we did the top AI-related interviews of the year. And that, of course, since it was number one overall, it was also in our top AI system or AI interview discussions. You can check that out. That's episode 199 if you want to learn even more about AI, including that discussion that we just had there. So thanks for your help compiling this list, Darian. You did some research to determine what this top 10 list is based on metrics, and it's somewhat of a manual process. So thank you for putting together the list. It's really, really interesting.
Yeah, it was super interesting. I'm excited to see what happens next year with all the different interviews we have lined up already. I'm excited to see what the audience thinks of them all.
Yeah, likewise. Really excited. Well, thank you for being here today. The audience, thank you for being engaging with this podcast, and we look forward to continuing out the rest of this year and getting started on a new year and getting started on our next 100 episodes now that we've reached this milestone of 200. So thanks for listening. Again, go to transformationgroundcontrol.com to watch any of the past interviews, even ones that we didn't talk about here today. You can go watch all 200 episodes if you'd like. So you can find anything you might be looking for there at transformationgroundcontrol.com. The show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting Group. If you'd like to learn more about how Third Stage can help your digital transformation be more successful, regardless of where in the world you are, we have a global client base. Be sure to reach out to us. You can go to thirdstage-consulting.com. In the meantime, hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next week on the next episode of Transformation Ground Control. Take care.